All right, are we on? Good evening. This is the Wednesday, February 17th, 2021 meeting of the Community Preservation Committee. We are meeting remotely via Zoom, and as such, I will be reading from our script, if you will, concerning the governor's emergency order, which allows us to conduct open meetings in this fashion. I am Peter Pingator. First off, I want to confirm all members of the CPC are present. I will call your name. When you hear your name, please respond in the affirmative. I will ask the same of our staff members. And so I attempt to go in alphabetical order, but the chair goes last. Let's begin with Mr. Alpert, Paul Alpert.
I'm here.
Joe Barnes.
Here.
Artie Crocker.
Here.
Bob Dermody.
Here.
Laura Dorfman. Oh, Laura's going to be absent today. Chris Gerstle.
Here.
Penny Kirk. Okay, Penny is absent. Have we heard any communication from Penny Karras? Okay. And Rick Zimbone.
Here.
Okay, Rick, welcome. And Chair Peter Pingator, I am present. As Karras Lustig is Karras, you're here until, okay, present until about approximately 7:45. She'll be going to another meeting. And Kristen Wright.
Here.
Okay. All right. Good evening. This is an open meeting of the Community Preservation Committee. It's being conducted remotely, as I said, pursuant to Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020. We're going to be coming up on a year. And it is based on the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment. For this meeting, we are convening by Zoom, as I said. The app and the connection to the app is posted on our town's website along with this agenda. The meeting is being recorded. Some attendees are participating by video conference, so accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you. Take care not to screen share. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All materials for tonight's meeting should have been available online. The public is encouraged to follow along with our agenda, and we'll follow the agenda unless I note, as chair, I note otherwise. We are now we'll turn to our first agenda item, but first let me cover some ground rules. I'll introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude his or her remarks, I will go through our committee alphabetically. Each one of you can then make comments, ask questions, make motions. So hold until your name is called, or if you do speak and I do not call your name, let's make sure your name is on the record. That's what we want. Please remember to mute your phone or your computer when you are not speaking, and please speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, wait until I yield the floor to you. State your name before speaking, and we will go from there. Remember, each vote taken is a roll call vote. Our first item for this evening are chairman's updates. And this is a follow-up from our my update of our last meeting, where I informed you that we would be having a chairs meeting. I would be participating in a chairs meeting concerning Emory Grover. And I think the easiest way for me to provide that update to you is to refer you to a document that came to your attention. Hold on a minute, I occasionally freeze and I figured out a way to fix it. Okay. Which is correspondence from the chair of the select board, Mo Handel, and it concerns the potential acquisition of another parcel of property, or parcel of property that I think is contiguous to the Newman School site, and that the town is making efforts to acquire it. The summary of it, and I really do encourage you to read this letter and rely on that, but the summary of it is that the town is interested in acquiring it, making efforts to acquire it. The purpose of the parcel could be for school administration, but that would be, of course, subject to only if both the school committee and the select board jointly decide to pursue the site as an option for school administration building in that event. The assurances that I heard from the chair of the select board was that the town was interested in acquiring the property for general purposes, one of which might be school administration. What I've learned from and what I've heard from the school committee was the school committee was interested in pursuing the school administration building at Emory Grover with, I think it's fair to characterize the contiguous site to Newman as being speculative. It has not been acquired. There are no terms for the acquisition. There's been no decision about what to do with it once it is acquired. And of course, there hasn't been any approval by town meeting to acquire it. So in terms of, the school committee is here making its presentation for Emory Grover. And I guess what I'd like to remind the committee is in connection, think about what your charge is, which is we're not another version of the Permanent Public Building Committee. We are the Community Preservation Committee, and our responsibility and charge is to dispense with, precious funds, but in connection with preservation of historic structures and artifacts, acquisition of open space, redevelopment of recreational purposes, and funding of community housing. So when the school committee comes before us and is requesting funding, either in connection with design this year and then construction in the following year, we think about what our role is in terms of what we want to do with this historic structure and how that fits in, and not necessarily that there could be something else out there. There could be another decision out there. I would encourage you to think about what your responsibilities are on this committee and leave those other questions to other committees that are specifically charged for them. I think that will help narrow the focus and assist us in making decisions about this pretty substantial request and a really substantial decision that we'll have in front of us, both this year and following year, concerning Emory Grover and the request by the school committee for funding for its renovation and addition. Okay. So that's my update. Sorry if it was a little long-winded. Our next item is our single proponent presentation for this evening. And that is the Emory Grover renovation and addition project, option 3. The liaisons responsible for this project on the CPC are Joe Barnes and Bob Dermody. So I'll have either one or both of them, if I may, introduce the proponents, and then we'll have the proponents make their presentation. Thank you.
Well, you want to go? You want me to go?
Joe, I will defer to you this time.
Okay. Very briefly, we have Dan Gudikants here tonight, along with a number of members of the school committee and some of the members of the staff working with Dan on the Emory Grover project. So, Dan, I would turn the floor over to you and ask you to begin the presentation this evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joan. Thanks, Bob, as well. It's an honor to come before you again to ask you to consider an application for possible funding for the design and/or renovation of the Emory Grover School Administration Building. It's pretty clear to me in my 15 years as your superintendent that this community highly values and treasures its families and children and schools, and to consider renovating one of the oldest public buildings in Needham, the old Needham High School, into school administration makes a real statement about the value this community places, on its culture, its history, the community, and of course, education. The fact that this particular building in many ways anchors a certain part of the downtown area, and its juxtaposition with town hall and other important town edifices and community resources is pretty significant, and a key reason that the school committee voted to renovate the existing structure on Highland Avenue. There are many reasons we've discussed. We'll discuss tonight why we think this is important. We come to you humbly, knowing that there are limited resources, but there is an extraordinary possibility for the community through the CPC to really consider adding to the value of its downtown area and still treasuring a building which represents the education of its young people. So with that, just really as an overview, I want to thank Steve Popper, Hank Half, and Gulati, and Reese and Joel from BH+A. I think I'm going to turn this over to Reese, who's going to give you a rundown of what is proposed for the site. And then after that, we will entertain whatever questions you may have. So with that, Reese, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dan. Hank?
Can you all see
Okay.
the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity to present the historic Emory Grover building today. This presentation is a brief refresh of our presentation to the CPC on November 18th of last year. Bargman Henry Archetype has worked with the town of Needham for about 18 months to study Emory Grover toward its continued use as the Needham School Administration Building. Our feasibility study was submitted to the town this past June. Next slide.
Let's see. There we go.
There we go. Emory Grover was constructed in 1897 as the town high school. It served as a junior high school from 1923 until 1929, when it became an elementary school. In 1947, Emory Grover became the Needham School Administration Building and has served in that capacity continuously since and remains so today. In 1987, the building was recognized as historic and placed on the National Register of Historic Places. The Emory Grover building began with the donation of land by William Mosley, designed by the architectural firm of Whitman and Hood, and built by F.G. Colburn. The building was named for the Honorable Judge Emory Grover, who served as a selectman and school committee member. Emory Grover represents the only example of Renaissance Revival architecture in Needham and has served as the gateway into Needham Town Center for over 120 years. We were fortunate to locate some of the original architectural drawings at the Massachusetts Archives. This original blueprint of the basement plan shows how building systems were arranged, including coal-fired furnace, storage areas, and exercise rooms. The first floor was accessed by monumental stairs on Highland Avenue, with flanking porticos on the north and south ends. Wardrobes or lockers for students were located along with 3 classrooms, the superintendent's office, teachers and principal's offices as well. Ascending the stairs to the second floor led students to 2 additional classrooms and a large auditorium. The north classroom remains mostly intact and is used today for conferences and meetings. Finally, the third floor or attic was designed as darkrooms for photography classes. This floor was condemned in 1935 and as structurally insufficient remains so today, being used only for limited storage. The value of Emory Grover is its integral part of Needham's town fabric. Recognized by the town, efforts to protect it culminated with its acceptance on the National Register of Historic Places in 1987. As is often the case with many 120-year-old buildings, Emory Grover has declined over the decades. All existing building systems, including life safety, are non-functioning, outdated, or missing. The original slate roof continues to leak, requiring trash barrel rainwater collection. The original windows are non-functional and require replacement. Over the years, emergency interventions have been required to stabilize the structure, including supporting the stairways and bracing the south portico. The only vertical access in the building are the interior stairs, which had to be supported with tie rods to prevent further sagging. Ventilation of the building is poor and grossly insufficient. The Highland Avenue School, built to the north of Emory Grover in 1924, was demolished in 1984 for condominium development. Emory Grover will likely suffer the same fate without preservation. The efforts to continue the building as the school administration department requires significant work, which comes at a cost. The cost to continue Emory Grover includes an obligation to comply with local historic guidelines of Needham and federal guidelines outlined by the Secretary of Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. The recommended solution supported by the Permanent Public Building Committee, the Planning Board, and the School Committee is to move forward with an addition to Emory Grover, with all work required to bring the entire facility into compliance with all building and accessibility codes, while restoration of the exterior preserves Emory Grover as the important historical structure that it is. Option 3, rotated, as illustrated here, creates an addition to the rear or east with minimal impact to the original building. Accessibility is provided through the new entrance, through the new addition at the first level with an elevator and code compliant egress stairs. Human resources, food service, transportation are laid out around the perimeter of the new addition with support services toward the center corridor. This layout gives all work areas and offices access to natural light, fresh air, while utilizing the large spaces of Emory Grover for bigger program areas such as conference center, department IT, etc. The basement of Emory Grover accommodates back of house functions. The second level houses the conference center, special education, and program development, while the third level includes the superintendent's office and business office, with some building services in Emory Grover's attic space. The project schedule presented here for option 3, rotated, was produced by Hank Haff, who will review. Hank?
Yes, and I think you've seen this before, but we've winnowed it down just to focus on option 3. We are targeting the annual town meeting in 2021 for design funds, and then annual town meeting in 2022 for the construction funding of the project. The once design funds are appropriated, BH+A would move immediately into the detailed design with the anticipation of being able to go out to bid in advance of the construction funds being authorized. The construction of the ad reno to the building would take approximately 2 years. And but prior to that, first Hillside would need to be prepared to receive temporary accommodation of the school administration, and that is shown here at about a 9-month schedule. That can't start until the police move out of that facility, but that would be timed with the 2022 appropriation of construction funding. The target for then opening the building and moving back into the facility would be in the summer of 2025. Let's see. Reduce this. Back to you, Reese.
Well, just would like to thank everyone again for the opportunity to present Emory Grover's preferred plan of preservation and addition as the continued use by the Needham School Administration Department. I think at this point, we'll open up to questions.
All right, thank you. All right, thanks. Are we done with this presentation?
Yes, these were a few additional slides.
Okay.
If we need to get into the details of why this project should be considered, some of the numbers that were included within Chapter 16 of the BH+A report that articulated the percentage of eligible for the project. I can stop sharing my screen.
Okay. All right, so now we'll turn it over to the committee to ask questions. Thanks again for giving us the refresher. And as is our procedure, I'll call each member alphabetically. If you have comments, questions, motions, we'll go from there. We've been through this before, so it may very well be that you do not have questions. Paul Albert.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the chair for his comments before about our role here, because I'm taking that to heart as I'm looking at the pictures and realizing that if we do renovate Emory Grover, if we build this addition and this structure, and we help fund it in order to preserve the facade, and it turns out that the administration of the school department is moved to a different location for whatever reason, we've still preserved a very worthwhile and historic structure in the town that will be able to be used for other town offices, for other town purposes. And so I appreciate the chair's comments that our role is not to see the school project, but to see this as a project for renovating a town building so that the town can continue to use it and to continue to preserve the historic structure. Having said that, I would appreciate, I know we've been through this numerous times, but I would appreciate you going over the numbers again on the design phase, how much the design phase is costing and how much the design phase you're asking the CPC to fund and how you derive that percentage. And that's really my only question, Mr. Chair.
I think, Mr. Chair, if it's all right, I may ask Hank and to lead with that, and Reese and Steve can help fill in some of those pieces.
Yes, as laid out in the capital improvement plan, which I believe everyone has seen, the amount that would be needed for this first round of funding is $1,475,000. And we have not yet heard from the Director of Finance, from Dave Davison, if there is any other funding available for this purpose at this time. I know he is working on that, and there was a memo that was prepared a month or more ago to the committee, articulating funds that would be available for this project and other projects within the CPC. So at this time, I think we would be looking for that full amount from CPC for the design phase of this project. Dan, are you, or Ann, are you agree with
Yeah,
that?
I think that unless, Ann, you have additional, Angelotti, Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, if you have additional information, I think that's the general big picture on the design, the initial design costs.
I believe that is, sorry, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Oh,
Um, I believe that is, that was Kate Fitzpatrick, the town manager's recommendation.
And Mr. Chair, if I may just make the political comment, that we're all very much aware of the recent history of the pushback that we got at town meeting for funding the feasibility study for this project. And I fear that if we go in front of town meeting asking for their approval to spend $1,100,000 being 100% of the cost of the design funds for a project for which does not qualify to be funded 100% by the CPC, I fear that we're going to get substantial pushback from town meeting members.
Okay, there, all right, so that's not a, all right, that's a comment, that's great. But, and we'll say, and those are kind of good, those are discussion points that we can have as a committee. No need for the proponents to respond, if you will.
If I may.
I'm not inviting you to, I'm not precluding you from doing so, but I don't need to know that it's necessary.
Okay.
But that's a good point, okay?
Well, there are additional design funds that'll be needed to accompany the construction funds to get us through the construction phase. So this is a little more than half of the total design funding that would be needed for the overall project.
So what Hank is saying is that when we go, this gets us through, I guess, the construction itself has embedded in it is our design funds, which are estimated to be somewhere between, they could be 25% of the total design cost in addition to what this number is, or upwards of, you're saying maybe 40%. Is that what you're saying, Hank?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so then the total design fund costs are not just 1.5, roughly 1.475, but an additional roughly 40%, which is
it's about another 1.2.
600,000. Yeah, so you're at 2.1, 2.2 million.
Yeah, and all of that is spelled out in the capital plan.
Okay. All right, so the next question, and you have another question, Paul, which
No,
was,
that, Mr. Chair, thank you.
okay. All right, so just chairman's prerogative, if I might. I usually speak last, but just to clarify a couple things. I do think that we should be analyzing this by staying in our lane, if you will, and exercising our responsibilities as CPC. In fairness, I didn't mention this, and speaking pretty much extemporaneously there, but in the chair's meeting, I did raise the issue of approving funds and then spending funds. That doesn't seem like a wise use of our money, our CPC money. If there is some sort of exit ramp, if there is some decision made to relocate the school administration building to this other parcel. And I don't want to, this is one of those things I did not take careful notes of that meeting, but my recollection was that those issues would be, that there would be some clarity on this by May, I believe. of this year. So it'll be, okay, maybe we'll let Dan answer that question.
Yeah,
Because I guess my point in all of this is, yes, we should be analyzing this, and we shouldn't be playing the role of the finance committee or playing the role of the permanent public building committee. We should be thinking about what our charge is as a CPC, but we also have to think about the fact that these are our funds and we need to be careful with them. And one thing that could impact it is if we do vote for this, and then there is a decision down the road to abandon this project, that's something that we should be mindful of in our assessment. So that was one of slightly nuanced position that I articulated in the chair's meeting, and I did not state it as part of my chairman's updates. And so, but I think that's a question that's worth kind of getting an answer to, if you will. Does that make sense to you, Dan?
yes, sir, it does. And I just want to be clear so that the conversation can continue. The parcel that Mr. Handel referenced in the earlier message to you, the school committee has not discussed that formally. No one has studied that at any length. No architect, no designer. As far as I'm concerned, the school committee, with my support, is focused entirely, exclusively on the Emory Grover building, and not some parcel that may or may not be purchased by town meeting for some unknown purpose. And further, if the CPC makes a decision that it will fund a portion of this project, whatever portion it determines, and at a later date, before funds are spent, the town makes a decision about relocating school administration with the support of the school committee, then we would certainly want to make sure that the CPC is made whole. I'm afraid that parcel, frankly, is a distraction to this entire conversation. And I'm hoping that we can continue to consider seriously the parcel on Highland Avenue for a whole lot of reasons for school administration. That certainly is our intent for being here this evening, and we appreciate your patience for the whole process.
Okay, good. All right, thank you, Dan. All right, so Joe Barnes, do you have questions?
I don't have a question. I have a couple of comments. And thank you, Reese, for the presentation. Some of the slides you presented are areas that I think any of us have had the opportunity to go into the building are readily aware of. We've said as a committee, I think, both on and off the record, that it's a shame that the school administration, the town, has to house our valuable educators in this building, and we all recognize the need for a change. I keep thinking that this is, yes, this is where the school administration spends their day, but this is the town's building. This is a historic structure that I think is so important to the overall historic part of what Needham is. So I think we want to keep in mind that yes, school department is connected to it, but it is our building as residents of the town. I was interested to see I mentioned the coal-fired furnace, because I think that's probably still the way that Dan heats the building in the winter. It's not much more than that, if anything. So I appreciate, I think as a committee, I think we recognize the importance of renovating this building, or at least providing some additional space for the administration to do their work. I think the whole funding piece is what is a concern to me, I guess, as well as other CPC members. So we're hoping we can come up with something that can move this project forward. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, Artie Crocker.
A couple of questions. I'm getting some feedback. Okay, in any case, a couple of questions. Part of it's related to the timeline of Hillside. So a couple of things. What is do we know the cost? Is it, at some point maybe we're presented, do we know the cost of the relocation of getting Hillside ready for the school administration to move there? And also, what is the timeline of the repurposing of the Hillside School at this point? I can see the timeline that was presented there, but what about after that fact? Is I know Mitchell and so forth, but Could you give us an idea? That might be for Hank, and the cost of the build out for the hillside for the school administration is for someone else, but those two questions right now.
Let me, Mr. Chair, begin, and Hank can certainly complete that. We do have some estimated costs for what we would need to do at Hillside to relocate there temporarily. However, those are estimated, and I'm not sure that all those funds are actually necessary. We need space if Emory Grover is renovated to just merely relocate our offices. We don't need fancy space because, well, we're used to working in Emory Grover. We just need practical space where the doors open and close. That's essentially it. So I don't think it would make sense for the community to invest a lot of unnecessary funds at Hillside, but there are some practical things that may need to happen. Fortunately, with the fire and police department there, some of those things have been attended to. So we could, if you will, ride on the coattails of what's happened there. As far as the use of Hillside, Hillside will continue to be in use for the school department as long as there is a need for any kind of swing space. Right now, fire and police, possibly relocating school administration, possibly helping with a renovation project at one of the schools, for example, Mitchell. That would probably be a challenge because of its size and location. In any event, whenever the school committee has decided that it no longer serves a purpose for swing space, and when the select board no longer really has any use, the jurisdiction will be turned over to the select board for use, I believe, potentially as recreation land.
But did you
No
have,
specific timeline.
I realize that the funds, your funds mentioned prior, were not a full, full blown office, I suppose. And you're saying right now some of that work's already been done. But what is the amount that's been thrown around at least? Do you have any amount?
I'm going to defer that to Hank. He's got some of the detail on that.
Yeah, in the budget, we're carrying about 1.5 million. And that includes moving both in and out. There is some work that would need to be done probably to upgrade the electric, but we would take a closer look at that because the occupancy necessary for the school department would likely be primarily the upper floor and would not include the modulars. Modulars are currently being used just for school storage. And once the police move out of the lower floor, they also have some of the upper floor space. We'd be looking at only those things that are necessary for basic comfort for that 2-year period during construction. And then after, it's still too early to tell because the building is currently used as office space and would be used as office space. To convert it back to education space require a number of significant upgrades. And so that would need further study if it was to be used for Mitchell or other purposes temporarily.
I know times have changed as far as cost and valuations of various things, but has anything been done in the past as far as the school administration being somewhere else, actually renting space, leasing space somewhere else? Has that ever been looked at? And with the current situation of commercial real estate and what's going on, is that being contemplated now to take a relook at that?
That was part of the study. Although you're right, in the last, obviously in the last 6 months, 10 months, things have changed a bit. Reese and Hank, you may have some updated information on that. I know there was a cost benefit analysis in the payback period. I would defer to Reese and Hank.
Yeah, BH+A did look at that. They brought a local broker. They did sort of back of the envelope guesstimates. But even though there is space available, many of the immediate spaces that are available would be sublet spaces. So we might get it at a discount, but, and the initial estimate with fit out and other things was, and the rental for a 2-year period was coming in at about $4 million. So, whereas with Hillside, we're just doing some fit out and there's no rent involved. I mean, there are ongoing maintenance costs for heating and well, it doesn't have much air conditioning, but maintaining the building. But those rental costs, even at a discount of maybe 20, almost half price, would still add up to more than what they're looking at to move into Hillside on a temporary basis.
So, so taking kind of your reference of the existing building in Hillside, Hank, and also Dan as well, you almost, I mean, my impression, at least I thought Hillside was some contemplation in the future for Mitchell. It sounds like that's less thought at as an option if Mitchell had to be redone using Hillside.
You know, it's always a possibility. We don't want to exclude that because the basic shell classrooms, a gymnasium, a cafeteria exist. I don't know, though, that it would be sufficient for the Mitchell population. For example, if we move the Mitchell community to Hillside on a temporary basis, 2 years, Hank's right, there will be things that will need to be undone from police and fire to make classroom space again. There will certainly be costs involved in there. There's a heating system that would absolutely need to be upgraded. There would have to turn it back into a school. Now would involve some costs that maybe 5-6 years ago when we first thought about this, but we're not thinking about police and fire. Now we would likely incur.
Okay.
And I'm not sure that it would house everyone at Mitchell. Perhaps that could be addressed by modular spaces. So I wouldn't discount it entirely. It's just, I think it's much more complicated now than it was 5 years ago, because we have tried to explore its use for other municipal purposes.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for allowing me to seemingly go outside the bounds, but I believe actually it's within the bounds because it's forward thinking of what may or may not happen in directly related to school administration, which is directly related to the conversation in this building, even though we're kind of taking it out because it's the reference of the building being valued for the school as a building by itself. But anyway, thank you, Chair. Appreciate it.
No worries. I'm not arguing with you. Okay, good. All right, let's just a couple of points. Penny Kirk has joined us, and I think she joined us at approximately 7:30 p.m. So Penny, please announce your presence. Penny Clerk.
Penny Kirk, and I thought I was right on time. I'm sorry. Got the time.
Oh, well, you are right on. Well, we've been beginning these meetings at 7. So that's when we're starting. And you're right. We had up until the last few months, we were beginning them at 7:30. Okay. All right. So Bob Dermody, do you have questions, comments?
Comments, yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you. And thanks to the presentation team. Even though I've seen a lot of it before, it's still very informative. Thank you for that. I've been working with Dan and Joe and Ann on this for a while. I just want to echo my colleague Joe's comments about the uniqueness of this project. It is truly unique. We only have one of these buildings in town. And I think it's important that we do our due diligence, and the presentation documents presented, I think, will allow us to do that. Thank you.
Okay, and Laura Dorfman is not here tonight. Chris Gerstle.
No comments at this time, but thank you very much.
Okay, and Penny Kirk, questions or comments?
No comments, thanks.
Okay, and Rick Zimbo. Questions, comments?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have some questions. I do have some comments. I just let me start by thanking everyone who's come here tonight just to present the project. As indicated by a number of my fellow committee members, I don't think there's any question that the building and the fact that we've been housing our school staff there for quite some time now under, and I'll be honest, under deplorable conditions. I remember when I first became a member of the finance committee, walking through the building back when Chip Laffey was responsible for building maintenance, and walking into Dan's office and having him show us the the foot heater, I guess would be the best description of it, in Ann Gulati's office, because it was so cold. They were actually heating the outside of the building more so than they were the inside of the building with some of the capabilities of the HVAC system. So I don't think there's any question that the project is needed. My questions are going to be purely focused on the financial aspects of the project. I don't disagree that the building is a true gem. It's a historic building, at least the outside of it is. I would call the inside of it as a gem, but the outside of it is. And so I guess one of the questions I had was, let's assume, just for the sake of discussion, that the CPC committee decided that we couldn't afford to fund the project to the level being requested for one reason or another. I don't know what the level of funding would be. We haven't had those discussions. But what I would like to find out from the presenters here is, if we weren't to fund it to the whole project to the tune of 100% of the design funds for this aspect of the project, and also the 11 or 12 million dollars, whatever the number is, for the ultimate construction, what would the applicants do for funding? Where would that funding come from? And does that, how big an impediment does that present to the project in and of itself?
I'll lean on Ann to kind of help me with Rick's excellent question. And it goes really in many ways to the heart of the whole thing. How will this project be funded? I don't think we have a clear answer on that, and I don't think there's any way that we expect that CPC would have the ability, the wherewithal, or the need to fund everything at if you will, 100%. It's an extraordinary large amount of money, and I know that would preclude CPC from engaging in other projects in future years, at least for a few years. But you're right. The project is it's a critical. You know, we have a need in school administration to do something with what in many ways is a dangerous facility. I don't know, I just have to call it that. I may not have 15 years ago, but I will now. And there's a need for the town to reckon with that one way or the other. And then there's an opportunity to make it an historic renovation, which is why we're before you. And if there is a way to pull together different funding sources to make this project a reality, I think that's a win-win all the way around. And I may lean on you with the latest in the capital plan, or anything that we know from the town manager's office regarding the rest of the funding for this project.
So we had assumed, when we conceived of the project, we had assumed that a portion of the project would be funded through some type of borrowing on the town's part. And Emory Grover has been a part of the town's debt service projections in the past. However, we await an update to those projections this spring. And that would be not only an update for the Emory Grover project, but also for some of the other school projects that might be on the horizon that would not necessarily involve the CPC, including, renovations to the Mitchell School and the Pollard and some of the other schools. Until we have that analysis, though, that update, we don't really have solid answers to your questions. However, CPC, a commitment by the CPC to fund, a portion of the project as much as they are able within the limitations of their statute would certainly be a help in getting this project off the ground, this needed project off the ground. So that is why we're here today.
Okay, great. Thank
More
you.
information coming. I guess
No. Thank you very much. I appreciate the forthrightness. One of the other concerns that I had, the chair and I had a meeting the other day with Dave Davison to talk about our finances, the CPC's finances with relation to the some of the projects that we have on our plate and future projects going down the road. And it was a good exchange of information. But prior to that meeting, I took a look at the draft capital plan that had been presented to the select board a short time ago. It might have been January at some point. And I was concerned, and I brought this up to Mr. Davidson, I was concerned that there was no money included in that at all for the design funds. And he indicated that even though there was an application in front of us to fund that, so there was no money in that draft plan for us to use as we were analyzing our budget for this coming year. And he indicated that because of the question mark with respect to the property acquisition, that there'd been no determination, as you folks indicated. But I felt it placed us at a little bit behind the eight ball as we tried to take a look at how do we manage our funding and how do we determine what's appropriate as we look at other projects and the impact of just these design funds on other projects that we have before us, on some thoughts that the committee's entertaining now about putting additional money into a affordable housing bucket than we traditionally do, because based on the data that we've analyzed, we don't put a lot of money into affordable housing in the town, and so that's something we have to kind of shake out and weigh all of this. And so what I was looking for is perhaps a little bit more understanding of when and how we're going to make, more how than when, we're going to be able to make a determination on whether this is the project site or whether it's elsewhere. I know what the school committee wants to do, but I'm hearing some hesitancy on the part of the select board, at least from Mo Handel's letter. And so is there any idea as to when this is all going to come together? And more importantly, what's the decision-making process and the criteria for doing it?
Well, Rick, your question's another good one. That's two good questions for you tonight, Rick. I think that's it.
Boy, I am. I'm on a roll, Dan, and I can't continue to do it. So,
I cannot answer the question about what the select board is thinking about that parcel. That's up to the select board, and ultimately will be up to town meeting. I can tell you the school committee has voted to move this project forward on Highland Avenue. And they have not formally considered as a committee any other parcel. So I don't know what that timeline is. And at least for this conversation, I think it's irrelevant, although I do understand the implication that you're raising. I hope Perhaps some of that information will be available within the next couple of months, certainly before town meeting. But as I said before, I think that parcel is a distraction to this conversation, and I guess I'll have to leave it at that because we're not really in control of that process.
Okay, I understand. And Dan, thank you. I appreciate your response. And Mr. Chair, that's all I have for now. I appreciate it.
So I just want to follow up on that because I got some sense that we were going to have a clearer picture on, well, I thought we were going to have a clearer picture by May on the sources of financing for design funds if the CPC doesn't vote, because we're your only source at this point. So if we don't vote to fund the entire amount requested, I think my question in the chair's meeting was, what would the impact be on the project? And I think that there was some suggestion it could delay it, but I also think that I did a follow-up question and there was some indication, not by school committee, and so this may be unfair to you folks, but I thought that there was some indication that these issues, the capital plan for the update on the capital plan would be, and that information will be provided by May, and questions of what they were.
Don't worry, folks, that happens periodically. We lose the chairman.
Okay, next.
He usually pops back up.
As vice chair, I'll take over for a second. Has anyone on the committee not commented yet on this? Do we have anyone left?
No, Mr. Vice Chair, he is the final commenter on the project.
Okay, okay, so everyone's gone through once. Does anyone else have any other questions on the committee right now? Since we've already gone through once. Anything else? I don't see any hands up. I don't hear any voices. Okay. That's good. Well, I don't think we should call it quits until Pete comes back on, just in case.
Excuse me, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yes?
I just received a text from said aforementioned chair who said, hold on.
Hold on.
Do we need a motion for that? Or?
Hold on.
Maybe, Mr. Vice Chair, I'll just take this opportunity to say that, I do think to answer the chair's question, we need a little bit more time to understand the town's capital plan. That I'm not sure how Dave Davison and Angelotti, for that matter, are managing. They're really managing three budgets right now. One, the actual town operating budget, and the other is FEMA/COVID grants, which are exceptional and extraordinary and require a whole different set of resources, skills, and time. So the fact that Dave can come up with a capital plan, or at least a draft, in sometime in March will be great, and perhaps can help inform your discussions and deliberations about funding, if that's something you choose to do. And will certainly inform further discussions about any other parcels and the capital planning in general. So,
thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
All right. I hope I didn't miss anything.
Yeah, so we spent it all, Peter.
We didn't even know you were gone, Pete. We just kept rolling on.
Did you approve the project?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So did we talk about the timing of some additional information, and we may be able to getting some additional information by May? Okay.
Certainly before May.
All right.
Peter, I have a question. I think this may be a Hank question, and that is, what have we looked at as far as saving the facade, but it going to a commercial development?
All right. No luck. Now you're out of order. We're back. We're way back. We're a year back when we asked that question, because that's that was a consideration that they considered a year plus ago. But that was, that's kind of the permanent public building committee decision, et cetera. So,
That's still a question, for
all right,
consideration.
all right, fine. All right, let's Hank, why don't you answer that question?
Well, Peter, to build on your response, we did look at numerous options, and we actually found that just preserving the front facade and then building a new building behind it was more expensive than the approach we're currently taking. The advantage of the approach that's currently being considered is that it preserves the pretty much the entirety of the four sides, except for one corner of that existing facade. It would replace the roof, which has needed a replacement now, I think, for more than a decade, and would replace all of the windows. The interior would be pretty much gutted and reconstructed. But that's necessary for a whole slew of reasons, part of which Reese went through. And I think that so from the, as Rick Zambone mentioned, from the outside, it'll look very similar to what it does today. From the inside, it'll look pretty different and vastly improved.
So, and just to follow up, and Artie, I'm sorry if I was short, but that the one financial aspect of it would be that if it were just a facade preservation job, if you will, facade with the box behind it, one thing to note is that the CPC request would have been significantly less, but that's not, that's not what's before us. That's something else, and they considered it, put it aside, came up with, and now they've come before us with this idea that they've, think is the best solution for them, and are asking us for funding in connection.
Well, remembering that based on the school committee staying there, that was the original intent here. I'm sorry, the school administration staying there. We want to stay there. This is the building that we think is the most appropriate. Then all of a sudden we're hearing some inklings of, well, maybe it's going to be somewhere else. So the point being is, if there's inklings of somewhere else, well, we're not at the building. We're not necessarily at the building they were thinking about. It's a different situation now. Where it could potentially is a different situation.
All right. I have one additional question. All right, Joe, question or comment?
Just quickly, Mr. Chair, if I could direct this to Ann Galati. And this is, I should understand this possibly, but in a scenario where the CPC would provide some funding for the construction and the remainder would go to the town, did you say that the town would borrow money in order to provide the additional funding that CPC doesn't? Is that the way it would work? Because there's no talk about that dastardly O word of override. There's no appetite for that, I'm sure. But where would the money come from the town side on the addition of what the CPC provided?
So there has been no direct recommendation yet. I think the town manager, obviously, there needs to be design in order for there to be a firm number for that budget to go forward. But in very preliminary plans, this had been a part of the town's debt service planning. So the idea had been that there would be some level of borrowing for the project. And potentially some level of CPC funding for the project as well. But beyond that very preliminary planning, there has been no formal budgeting for the process yet.
Okay, so let me just follow up, Ian. Very preliminary, and the dollar figures that are thrown out there, let's say 12 million CPC, 16 million town. Is that a moving target? I mean, could it become 8 million CPC and 18 million or whatever, 20 million for town? Or that's part of a discussion that would be going on. Is that right?
Sure. And I'm going to ask Reese to potentially also comment on this, because the report actually did address possible CPC funding. But what the consultant has done is recommend something of a maximum level of sort of a maximum reimbursement, if you will, that could be considered eligible under CPC guideline, and it would be up to the committee to determine what would be appropriate. But Reese, would you care to speak on that a little further?
Yes, and actually, Hank, I'm going to ask you to share your screen on that slide that shows the breakdown. I think it was the slide 18. Well,
Perhaps 19.
yeah, I think it's 19. Thank you. Okay, so of all of the eligible categories, Emory Grover kind of checked the box on all of them. And if you see on the right-hand side, the green footprint is the approximate percentage of Emory Grover versus the addition. And so we took those numbers, and if you want to go to slide 24, or actually slide 20. So, and I'm not going to go through all this, but there are about 4 pages of data here where we took the complete cost estimate for the entire project, restoration and new construction, and we allocated based on the percentage of the original Emory Grover building versus the new. Some of these items were easy to apply 100% to Emory Grover, such as exterior restoration of the brick, the masonry, replacement of the historic windows, replacement of the slate roof, things like that. Where we use the percentages is where we get into things such as mechanical systems, which are going to provide fresh air, heating, cooling, ventilation for the entire facility. And so we took that percentage of what would be providing mechanical system service to Emory Grover, which is the 51.5%. And so we worked it out that way. And it goes through all of these things. And if this, by the way, is right out of our report. I can't remember if it starts on page 145 or if it ends on 145, but if you go to 145, you'll get there and you'll see that the line items that are on the left are directly tied to the cost estimate in the report. And then the large yellow boxes, such as what we're looking at here, electrical, that falls under the functionality and code issues, which are an eligible cost for the restoration. So we broke it down that way. And so the result of this table is, these are the hard costs, is a potential maximum eligible. This table wasn't really intended to say, we need that number and that's it. This is what appears to be everything that would be eligible for CPC funding. And that's the long answer to say it's really what the CPC decides they can allocate toward this project. And what we're showing here, this 12.6 million, is sort of the maximum. I don't know if that.
And Mr. Chair, may I just add, just to be very clear, that the ask is not $12.6 million. The ask is for you to consider this project as an historic renovation, and any funding that the CPC could put toward this project will make that happen. And that's really ultimately what we seek. And yes, the town then, through its debt service or other sources, would have to consider how to fund the rest of the project. But we completely understand that CPC has other projects, there are other needs in the community. And so what Reese lays out really is a maximum amount that would be eligible. We certainly and humbly seek some funding so that we can really try to preserve and bring back to life this particular building in the community.
Okay, Paul Appertan was up first, and then we're going to go to Rick Zimbo. So Paul first, and then Rick.
Yeah, I just want to get clarity whether that 12.6 includes the 1.4 that's being asked for now, or whether the 1.4 is on top of that.
Good question.
It includes.
It's all of it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, and then Rick Zimbo.
Yeah, I'm on. But just based on my past experience, what would happen, and kind of in response to Joe and Ann, with my experience on the finance committee, typically what happens is Dave Davison would make a recommendation. A project of this size is usually bonded. So they would go out for bonds to cover the cost of the project. But depending upon, it would depend on how much of that they would determine they would borrow. Some of it could come off of a free cash windfall we might have in a particular year, or some other source of funds. It doesn't all necessarily have to be borrowed. So just to kind of help clarify that a little bit. So if we weren't, the total cost of the project was 26 million, Hank?
Hank,
But yeah, 27.
27. 27 is the total cost.
Okay. And so, I mean, in our situation, if we weren't to be able to fund through our discussions, the full requested or the maximum requested amount, that money would be allocated across the historical bucket and would obviously have to spill over into the general reserve bucket that we have. And so we have to, that's one of the considerations we have to take into account. So, thank you.
Okay, Bob Dermody.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks, Reese, for the explanation of the spreadsheet. That's very helpful.
Really
Quick question on the premise of the 48.5% and the 51.5%. Was that just based on square footage, or was there another method to determine that breakdown that led into the spreadsheet?
Well, it's based on square footage as a starting point. And like I said, some elements of the project are 100%. And it's if you go through that section of the report, it actually lists which percentage was used, whether it was the 51% or if it was 100% or if it was 0. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I think I want to thank Reese for the presentation again, Hank again, and thank you for patience. Hank, you have a comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, I should just mention that Deborah Robinson has joined us.
Okay.
Is actually a Needham resident, but she works at BH+A and would be joining the team with her historical expertise. And I think Bob Dermody, you know her from the Design Review Committee, perhaps.
I do.
Okay, so I just wanted to introduce her before we signed off.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. And thanks, Deborah, for joining us. And
Yep.
sorry about the technical difficulties. I really apologize. And Dan, thank you once again for your presentation and your patience and your commitment to the project and the process. All right, that concludes the proponent's presentation for this evening concerning FY 2201, and then we'll go on to our next agenda item, and that is liaison updates. Okay. We'll go through this and Reese, do you have a question or no? Or you're waving? You're saying goodbye. Okay, good. Good night.
I was saying goodbye.
Good night, all. If you're not staying, that's fine. I understand.
Thanks,
okay?
everybody.
Okay. All right. We'll do our lightning round. FY 2202 preservation of town of Needham marriage records. That's my project. Nothing to report. No updates. I think we are just waiting for our public hearing. FY 2204 town common historic redesign and beautification. Who is
Mr. Chair, no update at this time unless my co-chair, Mr. Dermody, has any updates in regards to that.
None at this time.
Like the way.
Okay, FY 2205 Fisher Street Trailhead. Updates by the liaisons.
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So next three are mine. So no update in the Fisher Trailhead. I think it's going to boil down to fairly simple. There's no update on the synthetic track of the Fazio as well. McLeod Field, Ed and I actually had a conversation, this is going back a couple of weeks ago now. He was basically just trying to feel out where we are a little bit to see how he could approach it, if there's any way different he could approach it. Maybe paraphrasing it incorrectly, but we basically had a conversation about it. The fact that at our last meeting going several, maybe 2 meetings ago, what was coming into play is the fact that it's a drainage problem that happens to be under a field. And so how does that fit into, how can he break it out? How can he approach it? Should he go back to Kate and talk about it differently? So that's where it stands. I don't know where he's going to, I don't know what he's going to be bringing back to us, if it's going to be worded differently, but there was a conversation going on as far as Ed rethinking or thinking about what he might need to do. That's all.
Okay, so I think that is a question that we have, and I guess the way I would approach it, and I thought that this was a question that we had put to him, but we'll put it in writing if we want, but I think it's in our minutes, which is I think we want to know we want a breakdown of the repair of the pipe versus repair of the field, basically underground and top of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
What's the cost breakdown between the two? If I could do it that simply. But in fairness to Ed, it's, that we probably should have that question in at least an email to him, like in a writing, so that he's not whispering down the lane, and we're not burdening Kate with, a question that is only almost correct. So, I think that needs to be in a writing, a question. If you'd like me to, I can update that, because I did similar questions for the reservoir, for the town reservoir. So, and my questions would be pretty similar to those. So I can kind of turn those around quickly, and then you can talk to Ed about that.
Actually, I'm writing him a question now on that one.
Oh, good. There you go.
I'll write him off a question about that.
Great. I make it simple. Okay, good.
Keeping it simple.
All right. And does anyone else have a comment or a question with respect to that? Of the McLeod field. I think that it is kind of where when we discuss these projects generally, I think that we're pushing the edges, if you will, of what CPC is, what it usually ordinarily funds in this town, and so those are considerations that we have to have. It probably, if we get that data from him, I think that will help facilitate that discussion. I think that we have very similar questions for 3 projects, for McLeod, for the town reservoir, and for Walker Pond. They're a little bit different than what we've had in the past. There is some statutory justification for the funding request. So it's not an insult that they're here, but we have limited funds, and I would characterize it as kind of a historic shift, if you will, from what we've seen in the past. And so we need to think about that. And this is a good opportunity for us to think about it. We can come up with some principles that are going to help everybody going forward. But I think that those 3 projects share those kind of issues and concerns that we've all expressed, right? So we got a lot kind of on our plate over the next couple of meetings, but I think that those are issues that we'll have to discuss. One way to probably slice it is the way you can see how I'm looking at it, which is, well, let's try and figure out what parts of it actually fit into the more traditional approach that we've had, and what the cost is associated with that, which is a much easier ask for us and a much easier issue to resolve as a committee. So that if we have both of those, if we have that information in front of us, that helps us answer those questions. So I'm just a juror of one there. Committee members can weigh in and on that now and going forward. But what I'm learning is that it's important for us, and it's important for us not to be afraid to get out ahead of this and start communicating to these proponents about what our concerns are, because it's fair to everybody. It's fair to us, it's fair to the proponents, fair to the town, so they can start looking for other, alternate resources or funding sources. Does that make right? And unfortunately, it may be that the project gets delayed because it may, if it's McLeod Field and I'm just speculating, but if we only agree that we're going to fund X number of dollars, which is the cost of the repair of the field, well, it may take some effort on the proponent's part to actually find the balance of those funds, and it may not be a fit for this funding cycle. But I think we'll be able to tease that out, and as we go along. Does it make sense to you, Artie? And
Yeah, no, I think it makes perfect sense.
okay. Any other comments on that?
None for me.
Bob Dermody.
No, just I agree. I've been thinking about some of those projects and how they fit into our scope. So thank you for bringing it up. I think we all need to keep thinking about them carefully. I have some concerns about the Walker Pond. I think I made the question at the time that it seems to me a project that we're funding that relies on the goodwill of the townspeople who live not even within sight of the pond. And from what I understand, there are some people who actually own, technically, legally, part of the pond.
Yeah.
So that's a concern.
Okay, so I think though we may have a mechanism for doing that, because I don't want to. I want to. In one of our next discussion points, I'm going to tell you that Rick and I talked to Dave Davison about coming up with some proposed financial modeling, which is going to help us and assist us in determining what we can or can't afford and what we do or do not in our discretion want to fund. Okay, so that all those three projects, Emory, Grover, and the increase in the reserve fund, the community housing, are kind of, all of them are somewhat intertwined and will come together. I think I'm realizing that the only way that those issues are going to come together is we kind of inch it forward by making some assumptions, but then we'll work that through as a committee and actually come up with a final plan. So I'm being a little vague about it, but we'll get to it in a few minutes. All right. Trail identification, professional design services. That's my project. We're just waiting for town for our public hearing. FY 2209 Walker Pond improvements. Any update to the information?
Yeah, just to tee it up along the lines of the previous conversation we just had. We've had Laura and I have had some discussions. I've talked a little bit to Peter about it, but if you take a look at that project, there are two phases still left to decide on how it's funded and what's to be done. Not so much what's to be done, but more so how is it funded. The project before us now really deals with the treatment or the pre-treatment of any flows into the pond. And if we take the Walker Pond and put it in the same application as we do the reservoir, or the whatever the other project was that's on the list, McLeod Field. If we treat the pond itself as what we have decided to fund, the pre-treatment of the pond and this particular application, we could decide not to fund it because it deals with what's coming into the pond, not the pond itself. Notwithstanding Bob Dermody's comment about the fact that some of these people own part of the property. That's fine. But we need to have a discussion, and I'm trying to tee it up, about that whole concept. And it would determine whether we fund or not fund this next category of the Walker Pond, and whether it should be funded. I think we all agree that the project should be done, but whether it should be funded from other sources within the town's budget, either free cash or the capital expenditure program, or we have some discussions about whether it should be or could be funded out of the funds being allocated for the NPDES permit mitigation efforts, Or could it be funded out of the DPW culverts and streams and culverts and brook budget, capital budget? So there are places elsewhere in the budget that that money could come from. Doesn't necessarily have to come from the CPA. And so we need to tee that up and have it as a discussion, and I leave that up to the chairman to do. But I think that's the next step with respect to that project, because then we have to go back and let the applicants know and take the process to the next step. So that would be the only update.
Okay, that may be, I guess we're gonna have to think about how we're gonna frame that. Probably, let's make that part of a broader discussion, I guess, for our next meeting. And I think you'll see how this kind of fits together with our next agenda item. So, all right, well, first of all, that concludes our updates on our projects. That concludes the proponents' presentations. Now we're on to discussion on increasing reserve fund contribution for community housing. And
Mr. Chair,
yes,
you missed project number 10.
I apologize. Thank you, Kristen. All right, so that's FY 22-10, Town Reservoir Sediment Removal, and that's going to be Paul Alpert and Penny Kirk. Any updates?
Well, actually, we have no updates, but you did cover it in your discussion. You mentioned it in the Walker Pond and the McLeod Field. That's really the question that's before us is, and I notice that Karis has joined us. So I'm going to throw it to Karis, the question of, can she talk to Tony, or do I need to call Tony? Because we need the breakdown from Tony as to what's the cost for the pond itself and what's the cost for cleaning up what is coming into the pond, coming through the culverts, coming through whatever.
So I had put together those due diligence questions. So we just need to get, though, I think it's fair to ask for written answers. I want written answers.
And they haven't come to my inbox, I don't think. So if you've got the due diligence questions, if they've been given to Kristen, if Kristen can just forward them to Tony, let's present them and let's get answers. Do you have those questions, Kristen, or are you still waiting for them from Peter?
I believe Karis has them.
believe they're forwarded to the proponents. I don't want to make this go too much in a circle, but I will certainly check back with Tony.
I had those.
Okay, so Tony already has them. Presumably, Tony.
All right, look, at the last meeting, if you can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
All right, good. At the last meeting, I informed you that I had drafted the due diligence questions and that they had been forwarded. So, and then what?
Then I misunderstood the last meeting. I thought at the last meeting you said that you had drafted them and you were going to forward them.
No, they were, okay, all right, fine. No, that's not how it rolls. That's not how we roll. Information goes to Karis. Karis distributes it to the committee, right? That's how we do it. In fact, Paul, that's what you tell me to do. That's one of the instructions.
But if I'm the liaison, and believe me, I've got other things on my plate. I'm very happy to carry the ball.
I know.
I'm very happy to have you carry the ball. But I was under the impression that the questions for Tony were supposed to go through the liaison. Now, whether they go through Karis first or not, I agree with you. That's the procedure. But it did not come to me.
Okay, let's put it aside. We need to get Tony the questions. We should get answers from those. And you haven't seen the questions. Is that what you're telling us?
I have not seen the questions.
Fine.
I have not either.
Okay, we'll get them. They will be sent to you. Okay.
And to Tony.
What's that?
Evidently, I've already been sent to Tony.
And not to be, I do. Okay. All right. Fine.
And I'm not objecting, Peter. Believe me. I'm perfectly happy to have you play the liaison role here.
No, I'm happy to have you play the liaison role. I'm not happy that I'm drafting the due diligence questions, but I have done them. Okay. All right. So with that, Okay, well, that's good. Let's get those circulated, because the due diligence questions are questions that are supposed to be put together by the liaisons, okay? So,
Peter,
yes,
my understanding was that you offered to write those due diligence questions.
yes, because they had not been put together and there were questions that needed to be asked and they needed to be answered in writing, okay? Please, I'm getting impatient, okay? It's not my
Well, I'm a
responsibility.
newbie. I didn't even know what questions to ask.
Okay, but that's your job. Your job is to figure out what the questions are to ask. That's what your job is when you're the liaison.
Well, I'm sure I'll learn something when I see your email.
Okay.
Thank you.
Karis, would you forward my email to Penny and to Paul? Put your seal on it, please. Okay. All right. With that, we'll go. With that, we're going to go on. Paul and I are old colleagues and friends. Okay. We are. Okay. So now we're going to move on to discussion on increasing reserve fund contributions for community housing. Okay. And Rick is going to lead this discussion. I don't know that he knew that, but he knows it now.
So you're saying I should unmute my mic?
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't aware I was going to lead the discussion, but part of our conversation with Dave Davison entailed us putting a stake in the ground, assuming we're going to move forward with something like this, putting a stake in the ground by the committee on what we would think that we would put into additional money, how much money, and what's the criteria that would be put into the additional money going into the housing bucket. And based on that, we talked about, Peter, myself, and David, talked about having the committee do something like that and discuss it. And so one of the items that I took a look at was I took a look at the most recent distribution of CPA funds that Karis sent out along with the agenda as to what the 11% would constitute by way of money going into each of the buckets. Now, the historical bucket is not available because whatever money goes in there goes to pay for the cost of the town hall, and so the debt for that. But if you look at it closely, I think the last estimate was somewhere around $350,000, and that may be going up, constitutes 11%, just to give people a frame of reference as far as what goes into each bucket. So there's roughly 350, maybe a little bit more, depending upon how much revenue we receive. And I understand there's been some increases that come in from the real estate fees and such. So that may go up a little bit. But so we had a discussion with David, and if we put a stake in the ground, and I just arbitrarily took a number for this year and said, okay, if we were to double the 11% and make it 22% would be going into the housing bucket, and 11% would be going into the other buckets, and whatever balance is left over minus 5% for administration costs would go into the general reserve. That would be a stake to start with. And so I looked at where $350,000 is, and based on the projects that we have in front of us for this year, that would basically wipe out any money that goes into the general fund. that we would be, that's all we have going into the general fund this year. At least that's based on the most recent numbers I've seen. So that kind of gives us a place to start the discussion. This may be, we may decide that this might be a more than 1 year project. But as we look to make the presentation, and the chairman made a good point a couple weeks ago, it said that we really need to include this in our discussion at the public meeting. And that's coming up in 2 weeks. So we need to have some semblance of what we want to do in order to present it at the public hearing as to what some of the thought process is. And what I really liked, and we had some discussion about this at the last meeting, is Karis sent us along a breakdown of historically the buckets and where the money's gone, and she did a nice job of color coding it, and everybody got it in their packet. But what I found striking was that recreation, 47% of our funding has gone to recreation, and 37% has gone to historical restoration or historical activities. So that's roughly 84% of our decisions have been in those two, with respect to those two buckets.
Why don't we do this, Rick? Because
Yes.
I actually, I think that that's an important slide to put up there, because it kind of explains how it is that we got to this place of, gee, maybe we should be reserving some additional funds specially allocated for community housing. So if we have that slide that's up, and I just want to, I want to give credit where credit is due, to quote Benjamin Franklin. Bob Dermody actually put together that spreadsheet.
Well, my apologies, Mr. Germany. I got it from Karis.
Well, because Karis, you know, it ties in. Let's just say that it all ties together.
Yeah, this is all that circular stuff. I understand.
All right, so look, can we put that up there, Karis? And maybe you can put my questions up there too. Just kidding. All right, there we go. All right, so
it's a nicely color-coded slide. But I think the important point is, take a look at the housing. It's 4%. I don't mean to steal the chairman's thunder, but
okay.
The housing bucket is 4%. And that even includes the money that we allocated for rental assistance program last year. I believe it does, anyways.
Yeah, I think it's the 120 at the bottom.
Yeah. So clearly, there's room for us to make a recommendation just almost solely based on this graphic, that we want to reserve money going forward, and we don't want to continue to pour it down some of these other buckets.
And so a couple of points just to make on the 2 points, which is there's an $8 million figure under the column H with a footnote noting that that's Rosemary Pool. So if you added that, it doesn't change the percentage. We've got a percentage of 47% basically being of all funds expended being spent on recreation historically. But the real number on total is not 12 million. It's 12 million plus 8. It's 20 million. Am I right about that, Bob?
Yes.
Okay. And the same calculation applies with respect to historic and town hall. $7,200,000 under general actually should go to the historic column, and then you end up with roughly $15,466,000. And I think the reason that they're under general is because those expenditures were so significant and they're bonded that is an amount that exceeds the amount that's allocated under the bucket. That maybe that's the only reason, but that's certainly, yeah, that's why. Those are monies taken out of the general funds to fund either a historic fund project or a recreation project. But if you put them under those kind of categories of those 4 categories, those are the numbers that you get. Sorry, go ahead, Rick. But that, in my mind, that kind of explains and how it is that we've gotten to this point. And we're not listen, we're not criticizing any decisions made in the past. We're not criticizing representatives of these particular stakeholders, because this committee is made up of representatives of stakeholders. We're not criticizing their conduct or anything like that, but we're looking at this I was trying to look at it in a somewhat equitable fashion, right? Isn't that our purpose?
Yeah, and just to kind of bring us back to the point we were discussing earlier with the Emory Grover building, if we were to approve their full request, that 8 million down below, which has blossomed to 15 million when you add in the 7 million under column H, would then blossom to a much higher number, 15 plus, and assuming it was $12 million we added in there, that makes it 27 million. And historic becomes a rather fairly significant percentage, almost 50% of the total that would be represented on the bottom of column I. So we'd in essence be earmarking our expenditures to a significant tune of money in historic. Now that shouldn't dictate what we decide to do, I don't believe anyways, with the historic project in front of us today. But clearly, I think it just begs for us to justify putting more money into the housing bucket, and seeing that that housing bucket is significant enough. It's been underfunded significantly over the course of this committee's history. So it may be time for us to consider doing something a little bit different going forward.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Sure. Can we get the, Karis, can we take down this slide because I can't even see you. All right. Okay. We'll go through our other discussions. I don't know whose hand was up first, but we'll start with Bob Dermody, the originator of the spreadsheet.
Which Karis supplied the data, I just supplied the colors. Mr. Zambone, could I ask, could I say the housing fund has been underutilized or underfunded?
It's been underutilized, Bob. Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah, just because from what Peter's explained to me with his background, we're in a unique situation in town where we don't own those things, or it's not a town entity. And that's, we can only fund what we're asked to fund. But I agree with you, if townspeople saw this without the prior knowledge of how this committee really works, which I'm convinced the only way to find out is to be on the committee, it's significant. I think we've learned something from this. And one more quick thing. The reason I did this is at a prior meeting, somebody said, well, if we fund Emory Grover at the full amount, we won't be able to, do anything else. I'm paraphrasing. And I questioned that and saying, but didn't we fund a huge project for the town hall? And then I wanted to see what we spent afterwards on the town hall. We funded the pool, and then I wanted to see what we funded after. I have since learned that if we do for Emory Grover, I guess at any rate almost, or a high rate anyways, we'll still have town hall paying off. We'll also have pool paying off, and now Emory Grover all at the same time, which we've never done from my understanding. So that's where I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, if I could, Peter, just to follow up on that a little bit, there are not only is there the Needham Housing Authority that could ask for funding, but there's also the Needham Housing Trust, which I believe, and I'll ask Karis, were you the one that put that trust agreement in the packet, or did somebody else do that?
I think that came from Peter in your meeting. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
right.
yeah. I made a recommendation to Karis about what we should include in that.
All right. So, but that also, and there's a real keen interest on the town manager's part, and also on the Karen Sonnenberg to utilize this bucket for some ideas that they have as well. So we had this discussion before last meeting, and Paul brought it up. We can retain control of the money if we decide to keep it as a planned for future use under the housing bucket. And then people still have to come to us and make applications for the funds, and we can decide what gets approved and what doesn't get approved, and do it that way. But what we have done is we've now earmarked money that prior to this, people came on a first come, first served basis. And so if you look ahead at the list of capital projects that are out there in the capital budget that was just presented, the draft plan, there's a number of recreational projects. Clearly Park and Rec and the people on that end of the world are doing their job and trying to get additional funds for some of those projects. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a question of we need to, I think we need to establish some type of priority, at least for next year, as far as funding some of these projects and not necessarily making it on a first come, first served basis. So I'll be quiet for now. Thank you.
That's good. So I think that what we'll do is, all right, I just want to make sure we're focusing now on increasing reserve fund for community housing. Penny, your comments, and then Paul Alpert.
Actually, I think Paul was first. If you'd like to speak first, Paul. No?
Well, I had two questions rather than comments. And I think the first question was already answered by Bob's question, which is that these numbers do not, the numbers in that chart do not include the numbers that we have set aside as part of the 11% in the buckets that are still sitting in the buckets for future projects. So, so that's been answered. Rick, you mentioned that adding up the projects that were in front of us and the 11% and then an additional 11% basically comes to 100% of the funds that we're getting for this year. And so my question was, when you ran those numbers, were you assuming full funding for all of the requests that are in front of us, the 1.4 million for Emory Grover and the full funding for the reservoir? Because we're talking about cutting those numbers back and for like three
Paul,
projects.
Based on the latest information that I had, that assumed the funding for all the projects. It didn't include the clock, which we took out.
Right.
It assumed full funding for the three projects we just had a discussion about as to whether we were going to fund those.
Right. And so partially fund those, that's money that will be available for the general fund.
For the general fund, correct. And just to answer your question, the last number I saw with how much money was in the bucket reserves was a little more than $2 million in the community housing reserve and 1.2 million in the open space reserve. That's after taking a look at the money that was requested.
That's correct.
So
I'll just make one more a very quick comment. We got a copy of the Housing Trust this afternoon. I did read through it quickly, and after reading through it, I'm even more convinced that I would want us to keep the money and not put it into the Housing Trust.
So let me just point something out. I understand your point, but I'd like to encourage those who might be submitting applications to increase funding of the community housing bucket to be at our public hearing. And so I've been in touch with the chair for Reg Foster, the chair of the Housing Authority. And so my plan was to have this issue be discussed at our public hearing. I don't know that we actually need to have a number at the public hearing. I think we can have a discussion about what our funding, and I'll ask Karis about that. But I do want, if it's Karen Sonnenberg and who's our affordable housing director, I can't remember what her actual title is, and I apologize for that. But Karen is is extremely knowledgeable and would be a source of really good information about what we could do with these funds and what she could see the Affordable Housing Trust of Needham coming before us in future years and applying for money for if there's money available. So it's kind of one of these things where I want to kind of stimulate some community discussion about, you know, what would it look like if we had some additional funds available in community housing and we're actually telling people we want to make this a priority. So I'm going to first Penny. Well, actually, Karis, you always get priority, and then we'll go to Penny. Okay.
So I just had a quick question about the this particular item, and should we almost give it its own identification number and sort of do a dummy application? I know it's not part of our normal process, but since we're making a change to our normal appropriation that we have, would it make sense to do it that way so we can include it on the hearing?
I like that idea procedurally. I also think that it's fair to the public.
And then would Rick be the liaison?
Sure. But I want Paul to do the due diligence questions. Because that's how it works, apparently. Okay. All right, yes, I'll be the liaison. Oh, no, actually, I don't want to be the liaison because, sorry about this, because it's kind of the reason why we wouldn't want Penny to be the liaison either. You know, we're coming from the Housing Authority. You know, she's the Housing Authority representative, and that's what I was until 6 months ago. So I don't think it's not appropriate. It's not appropriate. So actually, I think Rick should be. Rick, would you be the liaison on this?
To the extent we're having a liaison, I mean, that's just kind of a.
Is that okay?
Sure, I'll just add it to my list of chores. No problem.
All right, well.
It's like dealing with my wife. She just keeps adding to the list.
Remember the meeting's being recorded, Rick.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it, dear.
Don't write that down, Kristen.
I didn't know you felt that way about me.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so, all right, so that's, so, sorry.
Penny.
All right, so, but can you take that?
Yes, I can. I'm sorry. I didn't mean
Because
to.
it actually kind of makes sense, because if we're a town meeting, what I'd like, you know, think about this, if we come together as a committee and we like this idea and we want to increase funding, well, I you know, it's Rick's, you know, very experienced, knowledgeable former finance committee member, and I think it's a finance article, and I think it'll be interesting to see him as the proponent for it. That would be my view on it. And by the way, he's the one who really was driving this idea. So let's, again, credit where credit is due. Okay. All right. So, all right. Now we want to go. So Penny, we still haven't gotten Penny's question or comment, I don't think.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob, you are right. You have to be on the committee to know what the heck is going on, because I didn't even really know about this committee until I was asked to be on it. So apparently, it looks like it's the job of the commissioners to put together some sort of statement about the monies needed, and work in concert with Rick, who would be our representative, I guess. Well, I've asked Reg to be on the agenda for tomorrow night to just bring up the fact that this is being talked about. I know that you and Reg talked, Peter. So we need to figure out a way to move this ahead, but apparently nobody's ever asked for the money. So of course
that's not correct. Actually, actually, almost all of the money that's come out of the Housing Authority, almost all of that over $1 million has actually gone to the Housing Authority, either in connection with High Rock Homes or other projects that we had. So they know how to make the application.
Okay.
And so no, but so don't be that's, but it's to the degree it is an underutilized asset. I don't want to get too much in the middle of this, but and this is actually one of the justifications for increasing that bucket, is the housing authority is a separate entity. It's not part of the town. So you have to, they're whatever they get from us is straight cash. It's never going to be a bonded project. Okay. So they are looking at that, and frankly, selectmen, me, FinCom, have looked at that $1 million in that bucket or $2 million in that bucket and understand that someday that could be a significant contribution to a capital improvement project that the housing authority comes up with. So they've been kind of eyeing that and actually kind of preserving it in a way too. So just understand that it's a savings account that a lot of people have their eye on and are aware of. This is an opportunity to increase it, which would be a benefit, twofold benefit. One is it could expand, it could actually draw some other suitors, there are other uses you could have for community housing funds. It could be used for, I think you can use it for down payment for affordable housing. You can actually make grants, I think. So there's a lot of flexibility under the Act. And so that's where it would be nice if we heard from Karen Sonnenberg, who's basically responsible for the Needham Affordable Housing Trust. They may be an applicant for a particular thing, other than, think of them as the applicant for the rental assistance project, right? And also it increases it because it just flat out increases that money that can be leveraged by the housing authority in connection with what everybody in town wants to happen, which is a renovation of the Linden Chambers project or development in some fashion. Okay. So I hope that answers the question, but that's why if we have, and Karis, again, I like that idea. Now, the question that I have now is if we have this kind of idea that we want to increase funding, Rick saying, this is what it looks like for me. We're going to end up spending all the money or the equivalent of that. I don't know that we need to get too far ahead of that because we want Dave Davidson. We've asked him to come up with a financial model for us, assuming that we are just purposes of discussion, assuming that we double the contributions to community housing over, say, the next 5 years. And what does that look like in terms of our financial planning? So he's going to actually come up with a model for us for that. Okay. Does that make sense to you? And so I do have a question for Karis, and I guess the procedural question is, I like the idea of having our own grant request. If in 2 weeks, we may not know what the actual percentage increase is going to be. I guess, the grant request could state 20%. We don't necessarily need to fund it at that full amount. That's one idea. What do you think of that? Anyone?
I think it's an excellent idea.
I'd go for the 22 or higher if possible.
All right, we'll get 22. No,
the 22%. If we're normally giving 11% into the bucket, I like the suggestion that we double it, make it 22%. I think for purposes kind of procedurally, what we're asking for, we've already got the 11%. That's statutorily mandatory. I mean, 10% is mandatory. We're just throwing in a 1% kicker. So really, I think for purposes of this application, it's for an additional 11%. That's what we're asking for.
Now, can I do this? I usually kind of do this a little bit behind the scenes, but maybe, is there anyone other than Penny and I are we're excluded from this? Is there someone, do we have any other committee members who may want to help Rick on this? No, you're raising your hand, meaning you, or no?
No, Mr. Chair, I'd like to just comment on that. You had suggested prior to this that Bob helped and he put together that chart. But another person who was very much interested in working on this was Laura.
Great.
Dorfman, because she has an interest in this just because of her background. So she would be good. And I was going to make a request to the extent possible. I don't mind at all, being the person who makes the presentation and does a lot of the discussion. I do have some background, but I am going to need some help in researching some of the information that's available, particularly the information about what other towns do with respect to these types of projects, because I briefly went through the that wonderful little file that is on the computer by the CPA assistance group there, and there's a lot of towns that allocate monies for different things, including, for example, buying down some of the down payments for people to help them fund a purchase of a home, low income subsidies, basically. There's also repair work done. There's a number of things that are out there, and we talking about some of the ideas. Some of them may come from Karen, some of them may come from Reg, some of them may come from citizens out there, but it would be helpful if, when we were discussing this at the public hearing, that we could point to some examples, as you suggested a couple of weeks ago, of where other towns, and I just don't have time to do that research. So I'd kind of lean on someone else if they could.
I think that Laura actually would be, she's pretty good. She may be very interested in doing that. She's done some good research on the fly in front while the committee has been meeting. So why don't we check with her? And then we could also, do you think, it's a little unusual, but Bob, would you be interested in helping on this grant request article?
Sure. Yep.
Yes. Okay, good. So now we have 3 people. And we know that Bob we can do the research as well. So
In color.
it's great.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. So now we have a little subcommittee. Great. Okay. So now we have the committee. You guys have your research questions that you have to deal with. We have a proposal to make the request 22%. And that's, I think, where our discussion item is right now. So, I think Paul was in support of that. Sense of the committee. Comments, questions. Artie? All right, Chris.
Yes, I know it's kind of hard for us to go back to 2006 when I was a young lad, but have we never funded a project because we didn't have enough money in the bucket? So say housing comes to us in 2008 and we didn't have enough money in the bucket. Have we ever not funded a project because we don't have money in the bucket?
So housing has never gotten anything other than what's in the bucket. That's another way.
I'm just using them as an example, but out of the 4 buckets, have we never funded a project because we didn't have enough funds to do that in the time since CPA has started?
I don't know the answer to that question.
I remember when I was on the finance committee, which probably started around 2006, 2007, the request to do the repair work because of storm damage on some of the housing up at Cook's Bridge. And there was quite a bit of discussion about other sources of funding besides the CPA fund. And that a lot of that was prompted by the finance committee, and there was they went back to the drawing board. As a matter of fact, part of that request got pulled because the housing authority went back to the drawing board, found some other money elsewhere from the federal government, so that the request was cut back. That's my memory serves me, but I don't think there was ever a question of whether there was enough money in the bucket. I think there always was.
Okay.
But again,
that's just knowledge of to know of the past.
I don't think beyond that,
Okay.
Okay, Bob. Was it Artie first? Artie.
Yeah, I guess the question just goes into, we're upping it. I think it was a 20 or 22. I forget right now. It's 20, but I'm not going to say it's arbitrary, but what do we know? What does that mean? What is that going to give them? I mean, it gives us some money, yes, but what does that mean as far as the possibility to the future of what we could actually finance? I mean, is it going to be something substantial, or is it just, here's some paint? I mean, is it enough?
So I think that that's I think that would be one of the functions of the public hearing. I mean, it is a little odd, right? Because what we're doing is we're increasing funding and we're building it and hoping that they come is what we're doing, right? And so what we are trying to do is, first of all, make the case on equitable grounds, make the case, which is, well, what have we spent the money on and what haven't we spent the money on? And gee, community housing has been a really small number. So that is one part of the building block of making the case for increasing the funding. And then the second part of it is your question, which is, well, what will we spend the money on? And that's going to be, isn't that going to be the town meeting question? You're asking it. Well, you're asking a different question.
I wasn't asking what we're going to spend it on. I was asking what, could it fund anything of substance? That's the question.
Well, I mean, I guess we can address that I don't, it seems.
We don't have to know the answer now. We don't have to know the answer.
Yeah, okay.
But is it substantial to have, does it have any meaning?
Okay, Bob.
How much is in the bucket currently and how much will be there if we double it?
So there's roughly 2 million in there now, right, Rick? And if we double it, then we're going to have then it'll be another roughly 600,000. It'll be 2.6 million.
All right, so there you
Is
go.
that about right, Rick?
It's $2 million worth of work.
Roughly, but I think it's, Artie brings up a good point. This is the first year that's being done. And right now we're talking about a one-time project or one-time program. If we want to build it up to some substantial amount of money for some major project that's identified through this process, then this would have to be done on successive years, which a lot of towns do. I mean, Cambridge does 80% of the money that they have goes into housing. 10% goes in, roughly, approximately, 10% goes into the other two buckets that they have. And their housing bucket is their general fund. I mean, that's where they put their money and they do it that way. But in our case, I think it's real important that this is going to be totally brand new to town meeting. They've been living for 15 years with 11%. They have no concept as to why and how we'd ever go to 22% for 1 year, multiple years. And I think part of the education needs to take place as to why we would do it, why we want to reserve it, why, if we don't allocate some money for this purpose, then we're back to whoever comes across the application process first tends to get the money. And what we're really doing is we're really trying to help better plan how we should, treat all of the buckets or all of the public interest equally. And that's going to require some education to town meeting members because this is a wholly brand new concept.
Okay, Paul.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of two examples because Peter, you did mention, and you've brought this up many times over the past few years that we've both been on this committee, that that the housing authority is very happy to build up this bucket because somewhere down the road they could have a multi-million-dollar project, and it would be nice to have the money, to know that the money's there to fund that, and that's a worthwhile goal. But we've also had in the past few years 2 emergency housing projects that came to us. The first one was with the snows that we had, the storms that we had in 2015. The housing authority came to us because there was a lot of leaking in some of their housing, and now they wound up, I believe they wound up finding the funds elsewhere, but they came to us and said, we have an emergency, we need money. And last year, the town came to us and said, we want to donate, we want to use CPC funds for $100,000 for rental assistance. And we said, what do you mean $100,000? We're going to make it 120. But this increase helps increase the bucket for that major project that the Housing Authority may have and probably will have sometime in the future. And second, having the money there for when these emergencies pop up in the housing area, so that the Housing Authority doesn't say, well, if we spend that money on the emergency, now we're lowering what we're going to have available for this large project that we are thinking we're going to have in a few years. It's a great idea to just increase the bucket for those two purposes: future capital for a large capital project, and because emergencies happen and we want to know that we've got the money in the bucket to help with housing in the case of these financial emergency situations. That's my argument for why we
Okay.
want to do what we're doing.
All right, well put, Artie.
In some ways, is us raising this bucket more of a knock on the door that says, oh, by the way, we're not forgetting, we want to make sure you're there, and if you have something, come to us and help. I mean, is that what it's really doing? Is like, boom, knock, knock, knock. Here, we've raised the money, but in reality, in the future, you're probably going to need a lot more than this. But here it is to remind you. I mean, is that what's going on?
I think it's more, I think it's closer to what Rick is saying, which is, no, we need to do some sort of capital planning here. The way that we're allocating these funds is that those stakeholders that are kind of the most aggressive, they show these are all worthwhile and necessary projects, but the ones that are most aggressive are getting to the front of the line, and we've ended up spending a lot of our resources on just some pretty narrowly focused areas. And we're saying our charge is a little broader than that. What can we do in order to plan? How can we plan so that we're actually allocating more funds out there for community housing? That's what we're doing.
Well, I agree with that, Peter. My comment was almost based on if we do this one time, as opposed to what Rick is saying. Okay, here we're going to start the process of something to the future. We're going to be proactive versus here's something to remind you. Building something every year is truly being proactive. Is what
I think that obviously it has to be approved each year at town meeting because it's not statutorily required. So we're probably going to have to make the case each year. But that's one path that we see. Thanks,
Pete. Thanks, Pete. I appreciate it.
Okay. Rick, am I articulating what,
Oh, absolutely, Peter. I mean, the first year is the biggest hurdle.
Right.
After the first hurdles, after we buy the first hurdle, future years, if we choose to do this, then it's a lot easier. And quite honestly, as it was said to me when I was talking to the folks in the state, they said that this is really truly what the CPC was put there for. It wasn't necessarily to just evaluate projects on a first come, first served basis. It was there to plan the capital and how the town wants, or the city wants to spend that capital going forward. And this is almost, to a degree, this will be kind of a referendum in front of town meeting, at least the first one.
Okay. All right, Bob.
Yeah, I think that helps me understand this a little better, Rick. I think that's a great line right there about this. It's intentional and it's planning, and we're not breaking a trail here. Other towns do it, and I like that idea that it's intentional. So good. Thanks.
All right, do we have kind of a sense of the committee that we've got a support for it? So remember, what we're going to do is we're going to have some data, and we'll have a plan, an updated financial model, CPC. It'll be kind of similar to this CPA financial summary that we from February and then from September of 2020, but with some assumptions in it. one of which will be 22%.
Thank you so much for letting me know.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry.
Okay,
I
all right.
thought I didn't.
Okay, so which would be the assumption of 22% in the community housing. And that this ties into, we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but it's something that we need to kind of continue to talk about, which is the fund. Well, it has to do with our capital plan and the requested funding for design costs and anticipated funding for construction costs for Emory Grover. And I realized in my chair's meeting that they had some expectations. It seemed like things were basically pivoting around our decision. And so we need to kind of get ahead of that, not only on design, but on construction. And the only way that we can get ahead of that is, what Rick said to me, we need to put a stake in the ground. We need to, in order to get some sense of how this financial model looks, and how we can, what amount we want to contribute and what the long-term repercussions are of that with this committee. We need to make some assumption. So I'm going to tell you that this is for discussion purposes only. I think the number was, it may have been 6 million for Emory Grover. It may have been 5. I can't remember. It may have been 6. But I think the number I think that I may have suggested 30% of what their request was, and I think it ended up being the total amount being about $6 million. But that's only for purposes of trying to get a discussion going with us, so that we can, deal with the school committee, the proponent, and everybody else in town, and so that we can all figure out what we can contribute and where they need and what they need to do in order to get the project completed. So we asked Dave to put that together. I'm going to check with Rick. Did we actually put enough? I think that we did put a number on it, right? I can't remember if we did.
Yeah, I think we did, Peter, in somewhere around 5 to 6 million. I seem to remember was the number, and it wasn't a commitment. It was just for the purposes of putting a stake in the ground to get the other parties to react.
And also for us to make an assessment, because remember, this is one of the things we've said repeatedly, but if we were to fund at that $12 million figure, it would pretty much not, it would restrict, it would take up basically all of our funds other than the match. So we would be and that's under the model where we're only putting 11% into housing. And so, so I think that I don't want to make a decision for the committee. So this is just strictly for discussion purposes only, but I think I want to put this kind of in front of you and say, what happens if we agree to fund essentially 30% or 40%? What does it look like for us? Because the only reason that I'm doing that is because I think that the committee is pretty clear that, hey, we have an interest in preserving this and doing our part to preserve this structure. That's part of our job as a committee, but we have a lot of other obligations as a committee too. And some of the obligation is we don't want to handcuff the future members of this committee, the ones who come along in 2028 and 2029 all the way into 2044, which is where the last payment on Emory Grover would come in.
Peter, could I just add something to what you just said? During the discussions with Dave, he was really encouraging us to put a stake in the ground, because then what he could do is, let's just say, for instance, we said $6 million. That would give him a point on which he could run the various scenarios or models, so that if we said our most likely case might be $6 million, he could look at 4, he could look at 8, and he could run the models to determine what impact those variables would have on our future ability to fund other projects. And so he was encouraging us to give them a number. Don't just go along with the absolute 12 million that they were requesting. Give us a number, and then he could run those models. Secondarily, he also indicated, he didn't come out and directly say this, but I inferred that what he was saying was, if you put a stake in the ground, then you're going to get, and this is my interpretation of his thought process, so let's leave it at that, that you're going to get the school committee and the select board to have to make some determinations and some considerations because of where you put that stake in the ground and help to move the process along. And that, I don't know, Peter, do you agree with that? I mean, that was my inference from the way we were talking.
Yeah, no, but I mean, sure, he was, yes, I think the takeaway from that was a lot of it, everybody's kind of waiting for us. And so, and if we want to jump, you know, if we want to jump off the cliff and give them $12 million, great, you know, but that's not, or great, or at least that answers one question, but that's not really, you know, we shouldn't feel obligated to do that. That's not our, we have, understand the complexity of what our charge is, okay? So that, which in a way I found the whole discussion and the things that have come up recently kind of liberating, which is, okay, I get it. We're going to get a lot of requests. People are going to push the envelope on what fits under CPA. We have to exercise some discretion. We got to be careful about it. We don't want to, and you know, we still are a bit of a cog in the wheel, but at the same time, we have to mind our store here. You know, this is our $3 million a year that comes in, and we've got to make sure that we're doing it properly and still fit in as a cog in the wheel. But yeah, Rick's point exactly is that if we need to make a decision, and it'll help everybody move, it'll help move the process along. The same goes with, unfortunately, we have got a lot of this because we brought one on upon ourselves, increased housing. Okay, we brought that problem onto us. Okay, then we have 4 projects that have visited us. One of them is very serious, very large request, and that's Emory Grover. And then we have 3 projects that fit under this. We're going to push the envelope. And one of the things that Dave said is, and this also helped me understand what my charge was as a committee member, is that when it comes to finance, when it comes to funding on the town side, public safety and education are the highest priority. And there are a lot of projects that would either never get funded or get funded way down the road under that standard, and therefore that's how those projects find their way at times before CPC. Okay, so that's important to know. So when you say, Rick, that was an answer to Rick's question, by the way. Rick asked that question.
Yeah.
How is it that what are the town's priorities, and how is it that we make a priority? How is it that we end up with these applications, which seem like water, you know, DPW, water and sewer, whatever we want to call it, projects? How is it that we end up with them?
Yeah, I think that was, I agree wholeheartedly, Peter.
Okay.
That was
so. What that means, though, is that we were probably, in terms of putting together a financial model, it would be helpful. Unfortunately, I don't know that we can't decide this. We got to hear everybody out and get a public hearing, but we should be understanding that 3 of those projects, those 3 projects are going to be either that we should be talking about and thinking about what level of funding we're willing to provide on them. That's what we should be talking about and thinking about. Okay. I think that's our sense of the committee on this. I don't want to feel like I'm getting out ahead of you. I don't want you to feel like we're making decisions with, you know, I want input from the committee on this. So sense of the committee. First Artie and then Paul.
I guess it just falls under that. I have a hard time. I mean, we're all wearing multiple hats here. Obviously, we have to, take our CPC hat as a kind of a priority in some ways, but we're wearing multiple hats. I have a hard time putting substantial money towards, let's say, Emory Grover, when I do not believe that is the best location for the school administration to be, and to put a big addition on there when there are other options which are much more economical for the town as a whole. And so, now we're getting, but people say, well, if you build it and they move somewhere else, then you have offices. Well, you know what? If we build it and they move somewhere else, it comes across as a little bit of a clusterfuck. Why, excuse my language, clusterfuck. Why do we need another huge office, then office building in the center of town? Excuse my language. But why? So I have a hard time putting substantial money of our money towards something like that when it's only being proposed because of the also addition being put on it, even though our money's only being used for the front building. But that's why it's being proposed for the school administration, big addition off the back, when I think there are better options for them. So I have a hard time putting substantial money towards it for that purpose.
Okay, so that you're speaking to the question of $6 million stake in the ground. You're saying I have a hard time with that.
I have a hard time with 6.
Okay, good. All right, good to hear. Paul?
Okay, so I had 2 comments, but Artie just made me raise a third comment because I'm going to push back on Artie, first of all, which is that we're not the decision makers for what the town decides to build and where they're going to build it. We're just decision makers for whether or not we're going to fund what they come to us to do. It's not our role as a CPC to say to the school committee or to the select board, that's not where you should build the administration building. You should build the administration building where Hillside is, or you should build it on Central Avenue because you're going to be able to buy another piece of property. That's not our function. That's their function. That's the school committee's function and the select board's function. It's not our place to tell them that they're making the wrong decision. That's number one. The $6 million happens to be, roughly $6 million, happens to be exactly where I was thinking about as I was listening to the Emory Grover presentation, where they were saying 51% of the entire project, roughly, so call it 50%, can be funded by the CPC, and that number comes to $12 million. And I'm sitting here thinking, cut that in half, 25% of the entire project is what we can fund, which is $6 million. So I'm there. That's my second comment. My third comment is what really, and I'm trying to find the right adjective here, whether I'm bothered, whether I'm upset, or whether I'm concerned. I'm not quite sure which it is, but they're coming to us this year for the full amount of the design at $1.4 million. And I don't see a plan B if we don't give them $1.4 million other than deferring this project for another year. They don't have another warrant article to fund the balance of what we don't give them. And if we're talking $6 million, they have to understand that that's $6 million. You take out 1.4 million, you're down to 4.6 million is what's left for what we're talking about funding for the building.
I think that I wouldn't, well, we'll have to figure out that Rick may have some insight into this, but I would not be in favor of saying we're going to fund a total of 6 and we'll give you 1.5 this year. I think that if we have a principle that we're going to fund, 25 to 30% of that we're going to apply the same math with respect to design. And the town's going to have to find an extra $750,000 lying around somewhere between now and May. Or it's going to come up in a special, we'll approve it if they don't have enough to get started.
Well, that's a question for Kate Fitzpatrick, because it's my understanding from a planning board meeting that the warrant article, that the warrant has already been closed.
That's fine. They can find the other part if they have to do it at a special town meeting to fund the other half. That's not our problem. I don't think it's our problem.
Well, yeah, I think my point is that I'm with you there.
I don't know.
what my bother was funding the 1.4 million.
I still got a turn there. I shouldn't, but I guess that's kind of my view on that, but
I'm agreeing with you.
maybe Rick or Karis can offer some insight. Oh, Bob, hand is up. You're you.
No insights at this time, but a question. We have funded design before, and specifically on the pool project. Is that true?
So on both town hall and the pool, we funded 100% of the design.
Interesting.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, there's a precedent for it, but that's
Well, and I'll just say again, I want to find a way with this committee, working with all of you to find a way to save this building.
yeah. Joe.
I agree with what's been said here. I think this project is too important for us to turn away and say we can't do it. Whether it's 5 million or 6 million, you guys may have a better feel for the exact number, but I think we all recognize the importance, the historic importance of this building and the need that the town has to house the school administration. I'm concerned, as Paul alluded, that the town manager has already said that there's no money around for funding half of the design money. That's very disconcerting. You know, that we would have to fund the entire thing. Yet to hear us say that we've done it in the past, maybe the precedent has been set, and maybe we pick up the tab for the design and we move on. But I don't think any one of us wants to handcuff ourselves so that we can't do some of the important things we know are coming down the road in the years ahead by going well beyond our means of beyond the 6 million or 7 million, whatever the figure might be.
Do you have any insight into that? Because I actually thought that Dan Goodkantz was really saying to us, whatever you can fund with both design and construction, whatever in your discretion can do it, we'd love to be your partner. I really think that I thought that was the communication. I didn't think that he was saying to us, if you don't give us the full amount, this project's going to grind to a halt and we don't know what we're going to do.
No, I don't think he was saying that either, but he's certainly not going to be taking money out of the school budget in order to put it to a design. That's not the way the process works.
Right, I understand that. I understand. Well, Rick, do you have some insight into that? If we take the position that we're only going to fund 25 or 30%, whatever the number is on the design request.
The only insight I would have, Peter, is I know there's not unanimity, I guess would be the best way to describe it, between the powers to be in town, be it the school committee, the select board, and also the finance committee has to weigh in on this. And they're all going to be looking to make recommendations at town meeting, and they're all coming at it from a different perspective. My sense in all of this is when we put this stake in the ground, that's going to be the catalyst to start a lot of the discussions that, quite honestly, need to take place, should have taken place, and a consensus should have been arrived at long before it comes to our plate. You know, as everybody's, you know, it's not our responsibility to design the building. It's not our responsibility to make a decision on the land purchase. It's not our responsibility. Is this the right location? But all of these questions are going to be coming up before town meeting. And when the money is requested from the CPC, we're going to get a lot of the questions because to a degree, we're one of the proponents. And
Oh, yeah.
I think from our perspective, I personally think we need to put that stake in the ground. And I agree with Peter, what you said is that I think tonight's meeting was almost a watershed event because I haven't heard prior to this any type of backing down off of that $12 million. I heard that tonight.
Oh, yeah.
I heard them say, whatever you guys can contribute, we're more than happy. We want to be your partners in this. So I think from the school committee's perspective, I think they know that there's some other solutions out there, and they're really asking for our support, which I have no problem personally giving them, but not to the tune of the 12 million. And I think they backed off of that. There was a little, there was a lot of flavor in what they were presenting to us tonight that I don't think we've seen before.
Yeah, I agree with that. Penny?
This might be a naive suggestion, but you're talking about putting a stake in the ground. What about splitting it out and offering to pay for the design, but no other commitment until that is completed and the results and the recommendations are made?
So that leads, that actually, that's a good question. But that would lead, that leads to kind of the we're going to get a floor objection on that. That's kind of walks into that trap of are you funding design costs for construction that may or not happen, right? Isn't that kind of what we walked into in the first go round with Emory Grover? Is that, I'm not articulating it that well, but what do you?
I think there's no funding. I think based on how much CPC is willing to fund, the town is going to determine what other resources there might be. I think if the answer is the CPC will not fund any of the construction, I think that's going to be a deeper dive into determining what those resources are. I don't know if they'd have that answer by this town meeting, which I think then brings up your point, Peter, that we don't generally fund a design when we don't believe we can do the construction.
Yeah, and so that's why I felt like with this project in particular, we had to bring it all forward. We're actually thinking about this, Penny. We're talking about an application for construction that's not in front of us. That's happening. We're gonna see it in 12 months. But we have to have a discussion about it now in order to move this process forward. I think, Bob, do you have your hand? Is that kind of,
Yeah.
I can see the permanent hand up there. Is that you? What,
Yeah, you see, you just click the little hand button, Peter. It's pretty cool.
all right.
So back to this funding of design. I'm thinking back, we funded the town common design, and now we're going to request funding to build it. We've, both town hall and Rosemary Pool. So maybe I'm missing something, but if I can hear from people, and I think maybe Paul could speak to this, you've been talking about it, but what is our reluctance potentially of funding the Emory Grover, that it might not get built because of the particulars of this project? Because if we funded other things in the past, I see, why don't we fund this one for design?
No, my problem wasn't the funding of the design. My problem was the amount of money.
Okay.
1.4 million. That sounds like a lot of money to me for us to be spending.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
And the reason that I raised my hand in reaction to Penny is that to me, she's raising the Paul Siegenthaler problem.
Yeah, that's at the point. Yeah.
Yeah. If we're not going to fund the project, we shouldn't be funding the design, is what Paul Siegenthaler would say.
Right.
And
my feeling on it is, my kind of principle on this is that we're changing the precedent, but I feel uncomfortable funding full design funds, for a project where at most on the CPA side, we're responsible for 50%. But we're funding the full design, and they're trying to wiggle on that a little bit. I'll get to that in a minute. But so at most we're responsible is 50% under that formulation. And I feel uncomfortable doing that as a principle. And I also feel like for consistency purposes, when we put a stake in the ground, we're saying actually what we're agreeing to is 25% or 30%, whatever that number is. And so we're going to do that for design, and we're going to do that for construction. That's what we're going to do. And I think town meeting will be pretty reassured if other sources of funding for the design surface in connection with this. Town meeting was going to know, oh, I see, this is collaborative effort. They've got their act together in terms of how they're going to finance both the design and presumably construction. And it becomes less of exercise of being it presents itself as less an uncertain exercise in my mind. you know, if we agree to fund full design, 1.475, we still haven't held anybody's feet to the fire on construction, if you think about it. I mean, yeah, we'll put a stake in the ground, we'll send a message out there. Yeah, we're only going to fund $5 million now because we've already drawn down on 1.4. I think we need to kind of lay this out. Like, we need to know where we're going here as a committee and as a town on that project. And unfortunately, we got a plan not for this year, but for next year as well. That's kind of my view on it. But I think that we need to get that. I guess I'd like to know what happens if the message gets out to them, to the town, powers that be, that this is what we're thinking. So we're still, I guess, we're talking about a stake in the ground of I think it was 5 million, or I think it was 6 million. Let's just call it that. Now we're slicing it and saying, how are we going to deal with design? And and it's a great question. I guess we need to get some sense of that, because it's an urgent question. We need to have a discussion we need to let them know what the sense of the board is on this, sense of the committee on this, so that they can plan appropriately and respond appropriately. They being the school committee and other sources of funding. Don't you think that's correct, Karis and Rick? You're the finance. You've got experience on budget and finance.
My comment to that was, I think that if we use 6 million and assuming Paul's mathematics are correct, it's 25% of the cost of the project. That $6 million would include 25% of cost of the design. And I think the message we deliver, and we need to deliver it like tomorrow.
Yeah.
Is that we've had some discussions amongst the committee. This isn't a number we want to be held to, but we need to do some financial modeling, and based on that, our initial, and I don't want to call it a stake in the ground either, but our initial trial run that the initial model we want to run is with us funding 25% of the project, 25% of the design, 25% of the actual project construction, and use that as a basis for us to do planning, because we've got all these other balls that are in the air, about this, increasing the amount of money we're putting in the affordable housing bucket. We're talking about how we're going to fund other requests that have come before us this year. And we need to get a sense this year more than any of what the financial implications of these decisions are on where the money is and how it should go forward. And if we send that message to them and say, that's where we're starting, that's our starting point. And it could go up or down, but right now that's our point where we're starting from. And we need to evaluate that. And then while we're doing that, we suggest that you folks look at your end of this bargain and see what you're going to do and how you're going to handle it. And at the same time, I would not just stop at the school committee and at the select board, but I would also send the message to the finance committee so that they know about some of the thought process, because we're going to be going before them. I forget when it is, sometime in March. So they ought to be aware of some of these things as well. And that would be just my suggestion.
Okay, good enough. We need to have a sense of that. Now, Bob, is your hand up again?
Yeah.
Hand up. Okay, then Joe.
Let Joe and Chris go.
Okay. Oh, Chris, I'm sorry. Chris goes. Chris.
Just a quick question to ask in regards to the Memorial Trustees building. We only did a certain percentage of the construction. Where did design come from? Was that us, or was that somewhere else?
Okay,
The only reason I asked is, like, we talked about the town hall in Rosemary where we did design and constructions. We only did a certain percentage towards the Memorial Field House. Did we do design for that also, or is that paid for another part?
Good question.
we did not do design for Memorial Park. I do think that that project wasn't necessarily on our radar at the time. And that's why I do know that their request for Memorial Park was significantly higher than what the committee decided to fund it as.
Or it's like 500,000 or something like that, correct, that we gave?
Yes, and I think it was 3 million that was eligible.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, next. Okay, Bob, your hand is up, and then Artie.
Yeah, so I'm willing to fund the full design. We've done it before. I don't see why this building should suffer from not paying for the full design. And I'm afraid if we don't fund the full design, the project will die.
Okay. So, all right, Artie.
Yeah, it's just that I'm a little bit of a pushback on the pushback. So I'm not even going to talk about the amount right now temporarily, and that is, it is our responsibility to look at what is the project, and what is the functionality for the town, and how does it serve, and what is the future possibility of that project, and how it's going to serve the town. I think in general we look at that type of thing. No, we're not going to tell them where to put the administration. We're not going to tell them where to house it and so forth. But at the same time, here you want to save the building. I think we're all in favor of saving the building, saving the facade, saving at least that aspect, if not the whole building. But then we're coming at, so the project as a whole is doubling that building, if not more, something like that. So I think we do have to look at what we are funding. We are funding part of that whole project. And so I think it is our responsibility to take that into consideration, the future possibility of how it's going to be used. Anyway, just that. And as far as design funding, I don't see anything wrong with doing a percentage of it. I see nothing wrong with that. I think it's perfectly in line. And anything that we do in that building, I don't think we should look at Town Hall as a model of what we do at Emory Glover, because they are two completely separate, different things. The Town Hall was always going to be Town Hall. It was always going to be there. So they are two completely different animals in how we decide what to do. That's it.
Okay, Rick, and then Paul.
I first want to just thank Artie and Bob for showing me how to use this hand raising feature. I just found that absolutely fascinating to see your hand up, the yellow hand.
If you put the hand up, can you take the hand down too?
Yeah, you just hit the button again. It's great.
Rick, I live for your compliments. Thank you. I can go to sleep happy now.
Okay.
Really, I'm glad. Just with respect to Bob's comment about the full funding, I don't necessarily disagree or agree. I just think that I don't think we've made a determination, and we shouldn't today, on what that is. All I'm suggesting is that we use the same criteria to establish that stake. That's the boundary, if you will, on the plot plan. And if as we look at this, I would agree, that this is a historical site that's worth saving, but we're spending design money. We would be spending design money to design a school administration building, not necessarily design money to restore a historic building. If there's a different use down the road, then that the 1.4 million in design, if it's ultimately decided on the 1st of May that they want to use that building for something else, or they want to go somewhere else and it's not going to house the school, then that design funding, I don't think we have enough information, I guess is what I'm saying, to make a call on that. And I could go either way, but that's just my 2 cents on that.
Okay, good. All right, Paul.
So I'm kind of agreeing with Bob and a little bit not agreeing with Bob. If we don't fund the design, I don't think we're killing the project, but I fear that we'll be delaying the project. And I don't even want to delay the project. I really don't. This is a building that needs to be, they've got to get out of there. This building's falling apart. They should have been out of there 5-10 years ago. But I think, even if we ultimately wind up funding the full amount of the design funding, we need to push back on it now. We need to I don't want to go to them and say, okay, we'll fund the design money, but we're only going to have $4.5 million left for you. I want to say to them, you know, we're only going to fund X amount, and let them come back to us and say, we can't come up with the money. You know, we'll fund 25%, and they come back to us and say, we can only raise another 50%. So can you raise it to 50%? You know, let them do some work and sharpen their pencils.
Fair enough.
Okay. Artie.
I think we have to remember something here, and that is, no matter what we decide, the school administration, the personnel, it sounds like they are not going to be there in another year or two. They are going to be at Hillside. So I don't think anything we decide here has any effect on where they are going to be. Is the building in need? Of course it is, greatly in need. But I think it's already pretty much decided they're going somewhere else. In anything we decide, even if we say, no, we're not going to fund it, we're not going to fund anything about it, they are going somewhere else. Nothing we do is stopping that. Nothing we do should stop that.
I see. You're saying that at the end of the police, at the end of the Hillside use by police, they're going to swing school administration in there.
I think it's already been decided. I think that's not only has it already been decided, but it really should go that way. It's ridiculous to keep them in that type of building. So our decision really should not be based on that particular time frame.
All right. So Karis may have some insight into that.
So I just wanted to provide some clarity. So the Hillside is only envisioned as a temporary location for the school admin. I can just say, based on my role with facilities, that there would be very, very significant upgrades that would need to occur in order to make that building have longevity. I know when we spoke with Dan earlier about this project, he had indicated that the cost of doing Emory Grover at its current location is not significantly higher than doing Emory Grover at any additional location. So there isn't a huge cost savings incentive for not pursuing the Emory Grover historic renovation. So I do not believe their permanent intention is to stay at Hillside. That is simply a swing space. And in fact, the Hillside location is an option for the Mitchell renovation as a location to put students. So it may have an additional purpose once the school admin staff is done utilizing it as a temporary location.
Yes, but right now the question was our concern about if we don't do anything, you know, are we delaying them? Anything we do right here is not going to delay them going to Hillside.
No, we're not going to delay them moving out of the building, but we're going to delay the rebuilding of
Permanent option.
Building.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that we have, I guess, do we have a sense of the committee about Joe? Yeah.
Yeah, just a question here. We've bantered around a lot of potential options here. At what point do we come to a decision as a committee on the road forward? How much money are we willing to throw out there? The stake in the ground that Rick talks about. You know, when do we come to a consensus here?
So I want us to have that financial model in front of us. I don't know how quickly Dave's going to turn it around, but I think he was kind of going to turn it around quickly for us. So when is our next meeting? The public hearing.
So I think that was what I wanted to bring up next for the next agenda item, but potentially pushing the public hearing back until the 17th of March.
I think that's a great idea. Okay, so we need another meeting. We'll have our financial model. We can make some definitive decisions. Is it okay? I don't want to do anything wrong. I don't want to make a misstep here. Is it, if we want to start, do we wait until we come out of that meeting? Is it okay to communicate that there's this, you know, the sense of the committee is we're not going to be funding the full amount. It's we're looking at a financial model as a decision point of $6 million in total, or which is about 25% of the construction cost, and we're we're trending in that same direction when it comes to design. Is
So
that,
Peter, is the
Yeah.
purpose of your question what we're going to inform Dave Davidson?
no,
what Our intention is?
no, I guess I just don't know how what happens from here. Well, I guess.
So
it's-
I would just say we're not allowed to take a vote on the item until after
yeah.
we consult with the select board and with the finance
And
committee.
finance, and also we shouldn't be doing it until we have a public hearing.
Exactly. Has to
We
be a
can't take,
public-
yeah, but at least we can get it. Yes, but
So if you want a sense of the board, let's go around. And I will start and say what I said before. I was at roughly 25% of the full cost of the project, which sounds like if you want to use a dollar amount instead of a percentage, which might be a good idea, because if you give them a percentage, it gives them an incentive to raise the total cost. But 25%, which right now translates to roughly $6 million, is where I am right. And that's total. Design fund plus construction is where I am on what I'm thinking I would approve.
okay. So we'll go in alphabetical order, right? Joe.
I'm into a percentage as well. I don't know whether I can fine tune it to 25% or 30%, but certainly not the entire 12 million they were talking. 25% seems reasonable to me.
Okay, Artie.
I'm more in the $3 and $4 million range. Although I must admit, if this was only the Emory Grover building, I'd be higher. But as far as usefulness of money, I don't know, I'm in the $3 or $4 million range.
Okay, and Mr. Dermody.
I'm higher. I'm in the $6 to $8 million range.
Okay, Mr. Gerstle.
I definitely entertain the percentage. I would go, you want to put a dollar figure on it? I go to the $4 to the $5 million range. Total.
Total for me too.
Total.
Copycat.
You guys, and Penny.
I think I'll go along with Paul. I think 25%.
Love it when people agree with me.
And Mr. Zimbo.
I agree with you more.
Rick.
I'm going to go along with the 25% of the project cost, and if that translates to 6 million and you feel more comfortable with the dollar number, then great. I would just, if I could take the liberty, Mr. Chair, I would suggest that I think Dave Davidson mentioned to us it would take him a couple weeks of turnaround to do a model like this, and he had 1 or 2 things on his plate to get done prior to that. So if we were to send out this as the kind of the sentiment of the group, and you sent it out in the letter to the select board, the school committee, the finance committee, and asked Mr. Davidson, based on this information, to create and run a model for us so that we could get a better sense and perhaps even use that as input in helping us make our decision. I think he indicated he'd be willing to do that, and I think that would be kind of the next steps, if you would. You asked the question, so I figured I'd jump ahead.
That's great. I was, hold on for this. Sorry, I'm freezing up.
We can hear you though, Peter.
Okay, good. That's good. That's the direction that I needed. I'm with Zambone on this. And what's nice is there is this kind of 6 million, we're coalescing around it with some people, with one person being a little higher, one person being a little lower. You know, we're getting a good sense, and that's fine. That's the way we should be. You know, we want to have a discussion. Okay. So I like Rick's idea. Everybody kind of thumbs up on that.
Yep.
Okay, good. Everyone, Penny, good. All right, Paul. And Joe, question or thumb up?
Thumb up.
Thumb up. Okay. Next, at our next meeting, Bob will teach us how to do the thumb up on
You mean the raise hand?
raise hand.
No, he's looking for a thumbs up.
Thumbs
Oh,
up.
sorry.
Come on,
That's
thumb.
another button.
Okay. All right, so plan for public hearing. Let's say the plan is we're going to push it back. The next bullet item is plan for public hearing.
Does anybody have any thoughts on holding a public hearing on St. Patrick's Day? Not with respect to our committee, but with respect to our constituents.
What do you think? They're going bar hopping with two of their best friends?
Just asking, as an Irish guy.
And sitting 6 feet apart.
I heard Dropkick Murphy was doing a.
Okay, so I'll take that as a no. Fine. Thank you all.
We got to get our stuff done here.
Hey, I'm not speaking about the committee. I'm talking about the public.
Okay.
I think we should invite people to zoom in with a glass of green beer.
Yeah.
Asking for trouble.
That's pretty cool that you could actually drink at a public meeting, because you're in your home.
Hey, we can wear hats,
No, it's not. It's not.
This isn't tea, guys.
And if Mr. Fee was here, I'd be wearing a hat.
Okay. So, all right. So now let's just set our next meetings then. So we have March 3rd is going to be a regular meeting. March 17th would be our public hearing. The subcommittee for increased funding, you guys are going to have to, you're in a scramble. Okay. So I'll assume the responsibility on the letter and the stake in the ground. The subcommittee on increased public funding, you're scrambling.
Yeah, that's fine. I was going to send out a notice to Bob or a note to Bob and Laura asking their availability, and we'll just do a Zoom meeting.
Great.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
Sooner rather than later, Rick.
I'm going to try and do it the next day.
Great.
Okay, so the next agenda item is to approve our prior meeting minutes. Let's see.
I make a motion to approve.
Okay, good.
will
And
second
that
please.
motion is done by Ms. Kirk,
Chris, second Gerstle.
second by Mr. Gersel. Roll call vote. Oh, discussion. Hearing
Mr.
none.
Chair,
Oh, yes.
I did not print them out. I read them. And there was one, I want to say, sentence that had someone's name and something missing. I didn't write it down. I apologize for that. But if I could just ask that, subject to technical corrections, approve the minutes.
All right, was it around, it must, most of the text had to do with the presentation by
Tony.
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 Yeah, it was after that. And I'm sorry, but I didn't print it out.
All right, why don't we do this? Can you send Kristen an email, okay? And we will approve subject to those, typographical errors, we'll call them that. And then you can send her an email.
That'd be
She'll
great.
fix it.
I can do that.
All right, good. All right, so good catch. All right, roll call vote. Here we go. Paul Albert,
Aye.
Barnes,
Aye.
Crocker,
Aye.
Germany,
Aye.
Gersel,
Aye.
Kirk,
Aye.
Zimbone,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Okay, that's it. We have no more issues. We've got our next meeting scheduled, and okay, good meeting.
Make a
Sorry
motion
keep
to
us so late.
adjourn.
Second.
Oh, yeah, so we have a motion to adjourn. I always forget that with this screen. Motion to adjourn by Penny Kirk,
Second by me.
by Artie Crocker. Roll call, no discussion. Okay, roll call vote. Alpert,
Aye.
Barnes,
Aye.
Crocker,
Aye.
Germany,
Aye.
Dorfman. Oh, sorry.
Abstain.
Oh, I hope we can still adjourn.
Excuse me. Gersel,
Aye.
Kirk,
Aye.
Zimbone,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Good
Good
meeting.
night.
Good
Stay safe,
discussion.
guys. Thank you. Great meeting.
Good night.
All right.
Cheers.
Night. Thanks, guys.